from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, I'm Scarlet Fu.
I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Matt Miller. U.S. stocks, the dollar, and emerging market currencies all extending declines in moves sparked by polls showing improved odds of a Trump victory.
But the question is, what'd you miss?
He's been away for a while. The S&P just broke below a key technical level. Concerns over everything from presidential politics to the Federal Reserve rate hikes and jobs data sending gauges of anxiety surging. And while everyone is trying to predict how the U.S. presidential race will play out in the markets, the stock market itself has a clear-cut view on which industry is most at risk. We'll break down the most politically sensitive sectors. Plus, earnings season is not quite over. There's still one tech heavyweight to watch, and that is Facebook. Reporting after the bell tomorrow, we'll take a look at how much Instagram is adding to its bottom line in today's The Numbers Don't Lie.
And as we hurtle towards the close, let's show you where the major indexes stand. The Dow Jones Industrial Average giving back, or I should say clawing back, some of its losses over the last hour. At one point, it was down by more than 200 points, but has come back a little bit and is still off substantially, down 0.7% compared to the small moves we had in recent days. It's now off only 126 points. The Nasdaq is the big loser of the bunch, off by 0.9%, a 45-point decline. So let's head now live to the Nasdaq, where Abigail Doolittle is standing by. Abigail?
Hi there, Scarlett. Well, it is certainly a bearish day for the Nasdaq. In fact, it's a bearish stretch for the Nasdaq. The Nasdaq is now on pace for its sixth daily decline in a row, the longest losing streak since the end of May. As for today, it's on pace for the worst decline in about 3 weeks and on pace to close at its lowest level in 7 weeks. So again, we are looking at some bearish action here for the Nasdaq. Today, much of it appears to be driven by technology. The biggest drag on the Nasdaq today is Apple. But interesting, Scarlett, it's not entirely clear what's behind this trading action. It could simply be follow-through after the quarterly report last week that some investors considered to be disappointing. The stock is down 5 days in a row. But we wanted to dig into this a little bit more. We did reach out to Sean Harrison, an analyst at Longbow Research, who's really been very good on this stock. And he said he's surprised by the degree of this decline. And he also says that the company really was very adamant on the conference call in terms of reiterating the idea that the company is going to return to top-line growth in the December quarter, that they expect strong demand out of China. Some are talking about softness there. And overall, this should help support the stock. When we go into the Bloomberg and we take a look at #BTV 4700, something interesting has happened today, and that is the fact that the stock has dropped back below its 50-day moving average. The last couple of times that the stock has tested the 50-day, though, it's bounced right back off of this or the 200-day in two other cases. So there is some reason to think that we could see some continued weakness here in Apple, perhaps down to that 200-day moving average, especially, Scarlett, with Sean Harrison over at Longbow saying that the stock is trading at a discount to the S&P 500, but trough-level valuation supports a drop right around to that 200-day moving average, somewhere between 103 and 104. And it's important to mention he does have a buy rating on the shares of Apple.
Great context there, Abigail. I see Apple down 2%, and behind you, Facebook off by 1.3%. Matt mentioned that the company is reporting earnings tomorrow. What are you seeing? What are you hearing in terms of what expectations might be?
Well, you know, it's very interesting. This Facebook has just put up tremendous quarter after tremendous quarter, monster quarters, if you will. They've beat 9 out of the last 9 times, at least 9 out of the last 9 times. This time around, investors are looking for 97 cents in adjusted earnings on $6.9 billion. And to put this into context, it is simply huge growth, 54% and 214% year-over-year growth, respectively. So the bar is once again high. The stock could be a little bit weak today, some trepidation that maybe this will be the time that they miss. But even so, when we go into the Bloomberg on Facebook and we take a look at #BTV 4701, it suggests that if there is some sort of pullback, it will be brief. This is a nice one-year chart. We see a beautiful uptrend, periods of consolidation that strengthen that uptrend. And currently, it appears that Facebook is getting ready to break out to the upside from a period of congestion, even if it were to pull back slightly down to tuss that uptrend, Scarlett. But overall, Facebook looks to be in good shape. This chart would support that the upcoming quarterly report is likely to be pretty strong.
All right, good stuff. Thank you so much, Abigail Doolittle, live at the Nasdaq.
What'd you miss? Federal Reserve policymakers began their two-day meeting in Washington today. Officials are projected to hold the line on interest rates as they assess the impact of Britain's decision to leave the European Union. The BOJ out with its decision early this morning, keeping its policy unchanged and opting not to expand its stimulus, but it delayed the timing of its inflation goal. Members now forecast their 2% target may not be reached until March of 2019. That's the date that is years later than the BOJ originally forecast back in 2013. Earlier today, Goldman Sachs Japan chief equity strategist Kathy Matsui reacted to the BOJ decision.
Well, obviously, the bank has set very ambitious targets for inflation for quite some time. And if you look at the path of their forecast for inflation versus the street's forecast, there's always been this sort of crocodile gap between the two lines. So I think for some time now, people were sort of not really expecting the bank's forecast to be realized, at least in the time horizon that the bank was predicting. So I think today's announcement, frankly, does not really come as a huge surprise to anybody.
Certainly, Kathy, if you're looking on the Bloomberg at the moment, you can see the lack of shock coming from the market. On my Bloomberg, I'm showing how little the yen has actually responded in reaction to this particular meeting. What about, therefore, the functionality of the market in general? I know you feel that this is actually reducing as they target bonds.
Well, I think, the reality is since that September 21st monetary policy meeting of the Bank of Japan, they essentially announced that they're moving away from a quantitative mode of, targeting the quantity of money to the yield curve and interest rate targeting instead. So obviously, I think it's very unlikely for them to augment their JGB purchase operation if they're indeed trying to steepen that yield curve, particularly for the benefit of the financial services industry. And like you said, the yen has, frankly, since September actually weakened, not strengthened, even though there were some fears that that September announcement was actually symbolic of tapering. But instead, what we've seen is the yen trade weaker, closer to 105 than 100. And I think that combined with the fiscal stimulus package, the second supplementary budget the government just approved, basically means that for the Bank of Japan, the sort of ball is no longer really in their court, but it's really falling onto the onus of fiscal stimulus, plus the level of the currency at this range is not really too overly worrisome for the Bank of Japan. So therefore, it's not really that urgent for the Bank of Japan to kind of step up or put their foot on the gas at this juncture.
So, Abe more important than Kuroda right now in terms of the way that things develop from here. Can you tell me, though, what impact, and we're all obsessed with this now, a week to go, what impact would a Trump victory have on Japanese assets, particularly equities?
So obviously, I think like risk assets around the world, if Trump is elected, then that would be a surprise, a negative shock, I think, to asset markets globally, Japan not excluded. So I think the stock market in Japan, the knee-jerk reaction probably would be negative, as it probably would be negative for most equity markets around the world. And no surprise, the yen as a safe haven currency probably would get bid up as well. So, of course, most of us are assuming that or hoping that's not going to be the outcome. But, of course, if that does turn out to be the case, then I think it's going to be a risk-off mode for at least the immediate aftermath of that result.
Can I just dig in a little bit more on the currency? Do you have a sense that the Chinese authorities would drop U.S. assets and rebalance their portfolios? The euro could be one of the big winners in that. But do you think actually that rebalancing could affect the yen in a big way as well?
I mean, there's always talk of that, shifting in terms of the Chinese ownership of U.S. treasuries. But, there are a lot of negative side effects that come with what you've just described. And, of course, Japan is not going to be immune to a significant move of that nature. But I think at this juncture, the yen is probably in a relatively comfortable zone as far as the Japanese economy is concerned. If you look at the last couple of months of trade data, interestingly, exports have rebounded. Production has actually been relatively stable. So unless there is a huge shift in the Chinese, holdings of U.S. assets, I don't really think that's going to be a very major, implication for Japan at this point.
All right, we have breaking news on Valiant. The shares are surging right now after Dow Jones reported that there is another bidder circling Valiant's Salix unit. So Valiant is said to be in talks to sell Salix to Takeda for $10 billion, according to Dow Jones. And it also says that another bidder is circling Valiant's Salix as well. So you can see the shares up 19.4%.
And we have some other headlines about bond fund manager Jeff Gundlach. His double-line total return bond fund. Investors pulled money out of that fund in October, $33.2 million worth. It is the first outflow since January of 2014. And just to give you some perspective here in terms of performance, if you come inside the Bloomberg, you can see that Gundlach's double-line total return bond fund, which is the orange line, has trailed the Bloomberg Barclays U.S. Ag Index, which is in white. So the Ag Index has climbed about 5%. And Gundlach's fund has risen 3.7% since the start of the year. And this goes through October 31st, so as of yesterday. So that is an underperformance by Gundlach. We'll continue to monitor these headlines for you as the news develops. This is Bloomberg.
What you missed? By now, just about everyone on Wall Street has taken a stab at predicting what the stock market will do after the U.S. election. But what are stocks already signaling about what the vote means? Here's Bloomberg's Oliver Rennick to shed some light on the situation. Oliver?
All right, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think basically what we've seen is a lot of speculation, a lot of prognostication, if you will, about what's going to happen in the market, whether or not Trump or Hillary wins. But there's plenty of signals that are already in the market if you look at correlations. So what I've chosen to do here is look at the correlations for all 500 stocks in the S&P 500 and then basically plot them against our real clear politics polling of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump to see what kind of trends emerge. And indeed, some do. The key thing to remember here is this is also sort of an imperfect way to try and assess things because anything can really look correlated. Whether or not there's causation there is up to you. But here's what I'll offer from 7 months of correlation data back to March when it became a clear, almost two-way race. This is what we're looking at right here. At the top, I want to draw your attention to the number of stocks that are strongly correlated to these political odds. The first thing that I noticed that was interesting is that among those highly correlated stocks, 69 of them are due to strong correlation with Clinton numbers. Only 31 of them are due to strong correlations with Trump numbers. These are among the 100 most strongly correlated stocks, and I'd actually call them sensitive, because that means not only do they have a strong correlation to one candidate, they have a strong inverse correlation to the other. So this is what we're looking at in terms of sectors. There's a pretty clear breakdown where, on average, financial stocks have about a correlation of 0.4. That doesn't mean they're moving together 40% of the time with polls. This is basically a dot product, but we don't have to get into all the math right now. What it means is this is a moderately strong correlation to where when Trump numbers do well, the financial stocks do well too. It's inversely related to Hillary, less so, but it's there. Then you have the industrial case, which is very interesting, where there's a lot of companies that are industrial companies in the top 100 most correlated stocks, but they're both positive and negative, so at the end, their average correlation is pretty small, because essentially what strategists will tell you is that a lot of these industrial companies will benefit regardless of who wins. Then finally, we've got two that are very tied to Clinton numbers. Healthcare, of course, has been pretty negatively tied to Clinton's numbers, but what's surprisingly, those healthcare stocks aren't always extremely negative, because there's not a big positive correlation to Trump either. Then finally, there's also discretionary companies, which right now stand to benefit the most based on what they've done with higher Clinton numbers. So that's going to be very interesting to watch on a sector breakdown. But let's take a closer look at what's actually happening with each candidate. And let's start with Trump, because this is pretty interesting. All these financial stocks have been very strongly correlated with Trump. These are the 7 most correlated companies since March. And what you're looking at, the orange lines are showing you positive correlation. These are pretty much all financial companies. Morgan Stanley with a correlation of above 0.7, which is a strong correlation mathematically. You've also got E-Trade, you've got Fifth Third Bank Corp up there, and then a few others that really speak to this pattern as well, which is Coca-Cola. That's sort of the more industrial kind of consumer stock that has done better under Clinton. But then you've also got General Dynamics, industrial company that's traded well with Trump. Then finally, I also want to point out Qualcomm, because after you get past financials, there's actually a lot of tech companies that have had pretty strong correlations with Trump. And again, I'm not going to offer a big explanation for any of these, but they do fit a pattern that is probably a little bit more interesting than just pure coincidence. Then finally, let's bring it over to Clinton, because these numbers, I think, are what a lot of people have been looking at, because some of the strongest correlations in the market are due to Hillary Clinton's numbers moving up, meaning that I think the market has a little bit easier of a time interpreting what her actual policies are going to be. And here's what we're looking at for her. We're looking at a lot of retailers. We're looking at a lot of consumer discretionary companies. The top, Nordstrom, Tiffany's. You've also got Kohl's in there as well. But then you've also got some of these more kind of consumer American stocks. You've got Goodyear in there, Patterson. These are companies that are a little bit more sort of industrial, that are going to do well if she potentially does fall through some of the fiscal spending plans. Then you've also got a few examples. I put up here Monsanto. Just because this is an example where perhaps this isn't so much a political correlation. And this happens when you're dealing with strictly math, right? There's going to be some false positives here. But at the end of the day, I think you can take away a picture here that's very interesting, that does point out some stuff that's probably not quite coincidence. And then basically what you're looking at is a market that has traded largely on financials, is traded largely on the healthcare stuff. And at the end of the day, there's still a lot of questions that have to be answered.
That's some fantastic number crunching there. What I was surprised by was the weak correlation with healthcare shares, given that Hillary Clinton has moved the entire biotech sector with a tweet.
Right. That's very true. So you have to break it down for both sides, right? The biotech stuff has been pretty negatively correlated with her. Then you talk about some of the insurers that stand to benefit if she sticks with the healthcare plans that are already existing. But at the end of the day, what's different about healthcare than financials is that they are fairly strongly correlated to Hillary. But they're not that positively correlated with Trump. So there might be some relief if Clinton does not get the election. But is Trump really going to add anything to their picture, their plan already?
To play devil's advocate here, and you mentioned it in your presentation, but how do you avoid noise or stocks that appear correlated over a period of time, but that's just, you know, because of completely other things? Like,
I'm glad you asked.
Are there any ways to filter that kind of thing out, or you just sort of have to use intuition?
Well, it's tough. Firstly, I looked at correlations across different time spans. So when you get to 30-month or 30-day, when you get to 3-month, you're going to get a lot of those you're going to get more noise, I would wager, where if you have 1 week of strong moves, then it's going to throw it off. You take it back to March, that's 7 months where you have to have a pretty strong correlation. And secondly, more theoretically, I would offer that noise that arises from the math that already exists might be a little less detrimental to your study than speculation about who's going to be able to implement what rules, what agenda, and what that agenda might actually even be.
All right, Oliver, thanks so much for joining us. I want to break some news that I'm sure you're going to find interesting as well, or continue on a breaking story, and that is that Valiant has continued to surge. When we last talked about 5 minutes ago, it was up 14%. Now it's up about 33% after a Wall Street Journal report that Valiant may find a bidder for as much as $10 billion to cash in on the sale of its Salix gastrointestinal drugs unit. This is interesting, of course, because was it just yesterday that we had...
It was literally yesterday.
Just yesterday, Bloomberg broke a story that federal prosecutors are looking at fraud charges against J. Michael Pearson, Valiant's former CEO, and you saw the stock plummet. So yesterday it plummeted, today it jumped. None of it changes really, though, the long-term picture, which is the fact that Valiant is still down, I'm going to guess, about 80% year to date.
And this surge is only getting us back to October 6th levels. So this is a huge surge, but it really shows how much the stock is still getting killed. It's only at like a one-month high.
All right. So we will continue to follow this Valiant story for you. And the entire market's fascinating today as they started out kind of ho-hum and then fell and continued to drop throughout the trading day. We had bond yields plummeting as well as investors bought up a little bit of security there. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Scarlet. What'd you miss? Well, with the polls between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton tightening, Mexican peso's one-month implied volatility is now at the highest point today in 5 years. That is your white line. It's the implied volatility of dollar peso. The blue line is the Mexican peso, but I inverted it. So as it goes down, you're looking at the peso lose value versus the U.S. dollar. So traders are suggesting that the odds of volatility are going to increase, and they are paying up for it. This is the premium of owning Mexican options. Of course, look for this to move even further if that gap narrows in the coming days.
It's all about the peso right now. So exciting. All right, speaking of volatility, I'm going to stay on that theme and look at an interesting phenomenon related to the VIX. This white line here is implied volatility. Essentially, the VIX, what people pay to protect themselves against volatility or downside in the future. The blue line is realized volatility. So this is the actual gyrations of the market. We're seeing a real gap open up where the market is not particularly volatile on a realized sense, but on the implied sense, really spiking. And so you can see the spread here, one of the highest levels. Only 1% of the time in the last 3 years is the spread gotten wider. So it's kind of this unusual situation where actual market movement isn't that volatility, but people are really paying up for protection.
All right, very interesting stuff. I often read studies that show that mergers never make sense financially, and big companies always try them. I haven't seen a study that talks about how much sense a split-up makes. stakes. Klaus Kleinfeld at Alcoa thought that the two sums of his business were worth more than the whole. Today he's been proven right as Arconic trades separately. This is the jet engine parts business and auto parts business trading separately from the Alcoa aluminum business, or aluminium if you're in England. And you can see now that the combined market cap of these two stocks is worth more than the old Alcoa yesterday. All right, up next, the market close. This is Bloomberg.
Millions of homes cut.
We're moments away from the closing bell. What'd you miss? Stocks falling towards lows not seen since July, while safe havens like gold and the Swiss franc jumping. Traders refraining from piling into riskier assets before the Fed's decision tomorrow and the U.S. presidential vote next week. I'm Scarlet Fu.
I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Matt Miller. And I would like to welcome our viewers who are tuning in live on Twitter. You can watch our closing bell coverage live every weekday from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. somewhere on twitter.com.
We begin with our market minutes. The Dow at 1 point declined more than 200 points, but it has cut that drop in half and now off by more than 100 points, about 105 points right now. Trading volume exploded more than 18, 13, 30% above the 30-day average, depending if you're looking at the Dow Jones, the S&P, or the NASDAQ. And for the S&P 500, I don't believe we've actually tracked this until now. This is a sixth straight day down for the S&P.
Interesting.
Although it was very marginal moves in the last couple of days.
Yesterday we were down like 0.01%.
Exactly.
Still get interesting. At one point, the Dow down nearly 200 today. So starting to get some real jitters in the market, obviously coming well off the lows.
Well, and at one point, we also saw every single industry group down. Now we actually see gains in energy. And different energy stocks are doing different things because of earnings that we've seen coming out as well. Take a look at my IMAP here, and you can see energy is the only green piece of the pie. Everything else is down. Not as Japanese real estate off 2%, utilities down almost 2% as well, and telecoms down a little bit more than 1%. Take a look at some of the stocks. The most interesting I just highlighted, one of the most interesting I just highlighted was Alcoa. If you looked at it this morning, you saw it down 20%, and you probably had a little bit of a heart attack, assuming you're holding. But now you see that it's up 7% as we've adjusted for the split. So Alcoa is now trading separately. This is new Alcoa from Archon. Take a look at L Brands. The Limited, used to be called Limited. I know it well from my hometown in Ohio. Also, the owner of Victoria's Secret had comp sales forecast that disappointed both for Victoria's Secret and for the broader group. Pfizer ended promising new drug, or what it thought was a promising new drug, after it turned out it wasn't promising at all in trials, and also disappointed with earnings. Archer Daniels Midland, on the other hand, did better with earnings and its outlook, more importantly, than investors had anticipated.
All right, let's look at government bonds around the world. Greek 10-year yields, we haven't been talking about that much lately, but some progress on continuing the bailout there, so some that pulling in. German 10-year yields actually rising, the bond sell-off continuing around the world. Solid data out of Europe, higher yields. Let's look at U.S. 10-year intraday, because there was some interesting action. Early in the day, it looked like the sell-off was going to continue in the U.S. We got a poll early on about Trump pulling ahead of Clinton. At one point, everything was selling off, including treasuries. Then, as the market really started to sell off overall, finally that classical risk-off attitude or action asserted itself, and we saw the decline in yields ending pretty much close to flat on the day.
And when it comes to currencies, it's all about a flight to safe havens. You could see the dollar deteriorating against the Japanese yen, against the euro, also against the Swiss franc by 1.4%. So while we see the dollar weakening versus its G10 peers, it actually is gaining some ground versus emerging market currencies, including the Mexican peso, which, of course, tends to weaken as Donald Trump's prospects improve. And the latest polls show that that race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is tightening. The Mexican peso now at a 3-week low.
And what's great about that chart is it's closing the Access Hollywood gap. So the
nice.
Right at the beginning of that chart is when that tape came out of Donald Trump. We were all on air when
yes.
That
Billy
broke.
Bush, the Billy
and now
Bush
it's
tape,
almost completely erased, which shows how much his prospects have improved according to the market.
We should just call that the Access Hollywood.
Yeah,
gap,
we should.
By the way.
Yeah, that's how we
that should be the new title. All right. Meantime, just a quick mention of the Chinese yuan, because the onshore yuan is headed for its first back-to-back gain in 6 weeks. Both the official and the private sector PMI topped economist estimates, and not just the average economist estimate, but the most bullish estimate as well.
And let's look at the commodity market. Gold getting a nice bid. The flight to safety continues. Gold is sort of benefiting from the risk off. Crude oil falling a little bit, and zinc continuing to rally. Zinc has been doing really well on the solid Chinese data lately, continuing to make fresh 5-year highs. Strong manufacturing data continue to push it higher. And I want to bring up a chart of orange juice futures, which everybody should love because, of course, that's what they traded in trading places. It, too, is at a 5-year high on weather data and supply data. So orange juice doing absolutely fantastic surge over the last several years and in recent weeks.
Did you make your Duke Brothers joke already?
I just mentioned the Duke brothers. I can't remember their names. It's not Bo and Luke, but Mortimer and
Randolph.
Mortimer and Randolph.
Come on.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
All right, those are today's market minutes. Investors globally holding more than $50 trillion in cash. That's according to BlackRock research. It's more than twice as much as the balance sheets of all the biggest central banks combined. Our next guest says that cash has once again become king, as it's the only major asset class available to hedge equity risk. Joining us now is Russ Kostridge. He is head of asset allocation at BlackRock's global asset allocation team. So cash being an asset class on its own, doesn't that mean that it requires you to believe that inflation will be non-existent?
Not necessarily. I mean, clearly cash is not returning much these days, but neither are bonds. And one of the things you did get from bonds from those last 5 or 6 years is you got diversification. Think about all of the systemic sell-offs of the last 5 or 6 years. Bonds generally provided some hedge. The challenge now is if you look at the correlation between stocks and bonds is starting to rise, and that raises the question, at a time when bonds are expensive, when durations are extended, so therefore risk is higher, if they're not providing that hedge, what are they doing in the portfolio?
So they're not providing a hedge. They're not really providing as much of a hedge. They're not really providing any income, given the interest rates these days. So if you want to find something that's truly uncorrelated to risk assets, then I guess the answer is cash.
Well, you sort of go through the process of elimination.
Right.
And, gold can be diversifying. The problem is if the catalyst for the market sell-off is a concern about the Fed, if it's rising real rates, that's not an environment where gold is going to be as effective. Again, then it goes back to cash, because in that environment where real rates are rising, bonds are under pressure, stocks are under pressure, probably gold's under pressure, that's when cash does come in handy.
I think you mentioned the election, and there's certain, so it appears Donald Trump's prospects have improved. The peso obviously selling off, that's sort of like the obvious one. Equity markets not liking the uncertainty, perhaps not liking a change from the status quo. What's the rates picture look like under a Donald Trump presidency? It feels like that one is a little less clear, and the market does not have an idea of what to think about.
Joe, I completely agree. I think that's exactly the problem right now. We think there'll be volatility in the event of a Trump victory. For no other reason than it's not the expected outcome.
It's the status, it shakes up the status quo.
The dollar may come under pressure given some of the potential policies. Treasuries are not clear. Normally in a risk-off environment like you have today, you expect some bid. But if part of the question is, are we going to be in a weak dollar environment? Or are we going to blow out the budget? That's an environment where treasuries may not be the safe haven. It may instead be currencies, but not the dollar. So I'm thinking the Swiss franc, I'm thinking the Japanese yen, and probably gold to some extent.
And we saw that today.
I'm actually looking at a chart of treasuries that Bloomberg put out this morning, and I thought it was pretty interesting. I haven't finished writing my Access Hollywood line yet, though you put the red arrow there to show you when that happened. The key to this chart is that basically whenever Hillary Clinton becomes more popular, you see treasury yields rise. And whenever Donald Trump seems to gain an edge, you see treasury yields fall. Does this prove that the market is hoping for a Clinton victory or banking on a Clinton victory?
Not necessarily. I think there's something going on here. It's really interesting. There is a very popular narrative that's become embedded in the market that you're going to have a Clinton victory with probably a Republican House, and there's going to be some sort of a grand deal on infrastructure and fiscal spending. And that's going to lead to higher bond yields. It's going to lead to higher inflation expectations. The only question is, it's not clear that the political stars are going to line up in a way that's going to happen. So I think some of the backup in rates we've seen, some of the increase in inflation expectations seems to be predicated on this notion that you're probably going to have a fiscal deal, and that's going to be pro-growth, that's going to be pro-inflation.
If Donald Trump wins and he actually, he would have a Congress that would presumably do whatever he wants. And he cuts taxes and really cranks up the spending. I mean, he said he would spend twice as much on infrastructure as Hillary Clinton would. Let's just say all that happened. What do you expect the rates picture to look like in the event that Donald Trump gets all his wishes?
Well, if Donald Trump gets all his wishes and he does what he says he's going to do, I think it's going to put pressure on bonds and push rates higher, because you're going to have a very pro-cyclical fiscal policy, both from the tax perspective and from the spending.
Does the Fed hike at a faster pace than expected in that eventuality?
Arguably, because I think that's an environment where you're finally getting this mythical handoff that everyone's been waiting for between monetary stimulus and fiscal. And if you're getting that much fiscal stimulus, then that's an environment where the Fed can probably normalize at a slightly faster pace.
All right, I just want to quickly give everybody a look at the Square earnings that are coming out. It's really a tiny company, and you don't realize it until you actually look. They made $177.8 million in revenue in the third quarter. That is better than the $174 that the street was looking for, but it just puts into perspective how small Square is. We all know it. I'm sure most middle-class consumers have used it, the product, but it just doesn't generate that much revenue. The loss per share was 9 cents. That compares to an adjusted estimate of 2 cents, a GAAP estimate of 10 cents. I'm not sure if this loss is a GAAP or adjusted loss, but 9-cent loss per share on $177.8 million in revenue.
All right, well, here's a company with a lot more revenue, almost 10 times the amount of revenue. Electronic Arts, the video game publisher, reporting a full-year profit, or I should say giving a full-year year profit outlook that tops analyst estimates. The third quarter EPS guidance, however, missing. So I guess it's putting a lot of weight on that fourth quarter right around the holiday shopping season. Electronic Arts down about 2.4% in after-hours trading at the moment.
All right, Russ Koster, head of asset allocation of BlackRock's global asset allocation team. You're going to stick with us after the break.
Happy to.
I'm Mark Crumpton. Time now for First Word News. Donald Trump joined running mate Mike Pence and delivered what his campaign called a major speech about Obamacare.
I will ask Congress to convene a special session so we can repeal and replace. And it will be such an honor for me, for you, and for everybody in this country, because Obamacare has to be replaced. And we will do it, and we will do it very, very quickly. It is a catastrophe.
Trump spoke in the Philadelphia suburbs, which are crucial to his hopes of winning Democrat-leaning Pennsylvania. Attorney General Loretta Lynch is said to still have confidence in FBI Director James Comey. The director's come under fire for disclosing a review of newly discovered emails that may be linked to Hillary Clinton's use of a private server while she was Secretary of State. Director Comey and the Attorney General met briefly on Monday. Federal investigators are headed to Baltimore, Maryland. They're looking at a crash involving a school bus and a commuter bus that killed 6 people and injured 10 others. Authorities say the school bus rear-ended a car, struck the entrance to a cemetery, and then veered into oncoming traffic, hitting a Maryland Transit Administration bus. Police say no children were aboard the school bus. Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi got a first-hand look at the earthquake damage today. He was accompanied by his wife. He told reporters that they came, quote, to send a message of sharing, like all the normal Italians that in this moment are embracing the population hit by the earthquake. He said authorities would do all they could to speed up the process of rebuilding the area, but warned it would take time. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. Matt?
Mark, thanks very much. We are back with Russ Kostrich. He is head of asset allocation at BlackRock's global asset allocation team. You mentioned cash, and this is exciting and interesting to me. BlackRock has estimated that investors globally are holding more than $50 trillion in cash. It's so hard to get your head around the figure. It's more than 4 times total U.S. M2 money supply. How could that be, and why?
I think there are a number of things going on. I mean, one thing, and we've seen this in a survey that we do, the Pulse survey, you have a lot of people, particularly millennials, that were so traumatized by the events in 08 and 09 that they're holding large amounts of cash in their savings. And of course, for young people, that's not necessarily the right thing to do, but it's understandable given what's happened. A more recent development is what we were speaking about before the break, which is that for professional managers, particularly those managing multi-asset class funds, we're in an environment where people are starting to ask, will bonds be as good of a hedge going forward? And if not, do I need to raise cash levels?
Well, so if it's the first problem, right, a generation that's fearful of investing, then that money may never come back into assets.
Well, you have to hope it does, because you have to think about the environment. If you're a 25-year-old and you're going to have a very long working life and you're going to have a long retirement because people are living longer, to fund that retirement, you're going to have a very tough time doing that, earning 0% or 1 or 2% a year. I mean, those are the years when you need to take risk to compound those returns. And if you're in cash during those years, that's going to make retirement 3-4 decades hence very difficult.
But their mindset is not to come in and buy the dips. With valuations the way they are, it's unlikely that anyone is going to put money to work now in equities or in fixed income.
Well, the only thing I'd say about I totally get the caution, particularly if you grew up in 08 and 09. Equities are not cheap. In the U.S., I think they're expensive. They're actually much more reasonable outside the U.S. In the Global Allocation Fund, we are underweight U.S. equities, but we've put money to work in Japan. We've recently been adding a bit in emerging markets. So I do think there are parts of the world, if you take a global perspective, where there's still a few bargains to be had.
You know, I'm really interested in this idea of the lasting scars of the 08, the lasting ramifications of that crisis. You know, a few weeks ago on the show, we had Emmanuel Derman on talking about how the 1987 crash caused this permanent change in the way that options were priced. It's never been, the volatility smile. Decades later, the impact of that crash is still on. So it does seem to raise the possibility that something as traumatic as the 2008-2009 crisis could leave a lingering mark on markets in some way or another for a long time to come.
Absolutely. And, these phenomena have a demographic component. You think about the World War II generation, those that grew up during the Depression. There was a very different investment culture then than there was in the go-go years of the 80s and 90s. And I think when your formative years are shaped by that type of event, it is going to have a lasting impact, in this case, a bit of a scar.
Does it change? I mean, the Global Asset Allocation Fund, you're not just holding stocks and bonds, right? There are other assets.
There are.
Does it, do people diversify? I mean, I can imagine millennials say, you know what, I would only like to buy real estate now.
Well, look, I think real estate has a part in your portfolio, and there's certain characteristics of real estate that are helpful in the long term. It does tend to provide a decent inflation hedge. But the reality is, if you're levered to any one asset class to the exclusion of the others, you're never going to get the same type of risk-adjusted returns as if you diversify. And I kind of feel that the last 5 years have been a bad market for diversification. People could buy the S&P 500, go to sleep, and do very well. The problem is we're at a point in the cycle where U.S. stocks are expensive, U.S. bonds are expensive, and if you really want to have the best risk-adjusted returns you can generate, you're going to have a much more diversified portfolio than just buying one asset class.
So obviously, cash, you talked about that earlier. There's a strong case for cash, but a lot of people are in cash. What are some of the other options that where people can get that diversification? You mentioned earlier a little bit foreign currencies. Like, how should an investor, say, in the U.S., think about things like the franc or the Japanese yen in terms of playing a diversifying role in their portfolio?
Well, I think for most investors, they're probably not going to take a specific position in a foreign currency, but what they should have is international exposure in their portfolio. And it's a big world out there. The U.S. economy is only about 20% of global GDP. U.S. equities are only about 50% of the global market cap, yet most people have a massive overweight to the U.S. And again, that's worked well the last 5 years. My suspicion is it won't work as well going forward. Another asset class to think about, credit. When we talk about bonds, we almost always talk about U.S. Treasuries, which, of course, are providing very little yield right now. There are other parts of the fixed income market. There's investment grade, there's high yield, there's EM debt. all of which probably have some place in a broad, diversified portfolio.
Is this need to hold cash limited to U.S. investors? I mean, do we see that elsewhere in Asia, in Europe, among the emerging markets?
Well, the interesting thing is you go to parts of the world where cash holdings can be even higher just because you don't have as much of an equity culture. But I think in general the answer to the question is if we are going into an environment in which monetary policy starts to tighten, correlations between stocks and bonds are going up, that's an environment we're probably going to see slightly higher cash levels because, again, that's going to be a better hedge than we've seen in the past.
Let's talk specifically, obviously, election next week. How should an investor think about specific event risk like this?
I think for most investors, you probably don't want to be changing your portfolio based just on the election, particularly considering the fact that this is a tough call. Even if you knew who was going to win it, it's not exactly clear what the market reaction is going to be. We spoke about that a moment ago. If you knew Donald Trump was going to win, it's not obvious what U.S. Treasuries are going to do. So I think for most investors, you want to stick to the long-term plan. The only thing I would say is if we do have a surprise, which if the margin looks more likely than it was a few weeks ago, you're probably going to see some increase in volatility.
All right, Russ Kostridge, thank you so much for joining us today. Russ is head of asset allocation at BlackRock's global asset allocation team, usually in San Francisco, here with us in New York today. And we wanted to catch you up on some headlines that came out after the closing bell. First off, Herbalife says it will elevate the COO, Richard Gudis, to the top job on June 1st of next year. Gudis will replace Michael Johnson, who has been CEO since 2003. Carl Icahn, by the way, says he supports this move. Johnson will remain head of the board, but take the title of executive chairman. Matt?
All right, also, we're seeing a spike in the shares of Zillow in late trading, the company boosting its full-year forecast and beating estimates for earnings and revenue for the third quarter. And then finally, Gilead Sciences' third-quarter profit missed analyst estimates, driven by worse-than-expected sales of its top-selling hepatitis C drug, although you can see after hours the shares up a little bit. Of course, it's a very volatile and thinly traded stock after hours. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Scarlet. What'd you miss? Well, So it might be the day after Halloween, but there's still plenty of scary charts on China. And here's my favorite from Tom Orlik, who's Bloomberg Intelligence's chief Asia economist. Chinese state-owned enterprise are a scary proposition here because if you look at just the revenue of these companies, it's just shy of Japan's GDP. Imagine that. The revenue of Chinese state-owned enterprises is almost what Japan's GDP is. It's bigger than Germany's entire economy. So with all this discussion about how China needs to reform this sector, they need to streamline it, cut workers. There's so many hundreds of thousands of jobs at stake. Just think about how much social
people
unrest
might be
it would cause.
underestimating. They're like, I just got to reform from manufacturing to services or manufacturing to consumption. But there is a lot of employment and labor and money at stake.
This is not something that Xi Jinping can get done within 5 years. I mean, this is a generational issue.
All right, well, here's some good news. One of my favorite economic indicators, Macau gaming revenue, came out last night, and it is strong. It's at its highest level since 2014. Here's the monthly year-over-year chart. You can see really going back to, end of last year, it was still in the red, but it's really been returning pretty nicely, now up 8.8% from a year ago. And if you look at this chart, it really conforms pretty nicely with some other stuff like other EM rebounds and commodity rebounds. So it's one of these great sort of global bellwethers, an indication of animal spirits, but also probably an indication of people trying to get their money out of China because Macau is one avenue for it. But still sort of a sign of the blood pumping through the veins of the global economy at a faster rate.
It might be. I'm seeing 2012, 2013 was the peak of the Baccarat popularity, the big money on Baccarat. And the Macau, gaming culture has turned from that's where the big whales go to spend money on Baccarat to that's a place you can take families and they can see a show.
That's another way it's changed, kind of like Vegas. In that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at shipping container throughput, and this chart goes back to 2011 as well. I believe yours does too. And what it shows you is that we've seen a recovery over the last year. A lot of lines here, but pay attention to the thick line. That is a conglomeration of Hong Kong, China, Singapore, and of course Busan. You can see the shipping container throughput has risen in 2016, but especially bolstered by what's going on in Hong Kong after having declined in 2015.
That's a remarkable recovery there. I mean, given all the pressures that we're seeing in the China region. All right, coming up next, tightening polls have both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton gearing up for a potential post-election day battle. We've got all the different scenarios for you. This is Bloomberg.
Mark Crumpton. Time now for First Word News. The renewed focus on Hillary Clinton's email may be rallying her supporters. In the past 3 days, she's raised $11.3 million online. That's the most since she became the nominee. Clinton campaign manager Jennifer Palmieri says, quote, the race has tightened in a way we thought it would tighten, but that there's no indication the FBI story is having an impact. Those donations came after Director James Comey said the Bureau had discovered files that may pertain to its investigation of Secretary Clinton's emails. Donald Trump's making an appeal to voters who have already cast early votes for Hillary Clinton. You can recall your ballot and vote for him. That's according to the Wall Street Journal, citing a tweet from the Trump campaign's social media director. Laws in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota allow early and absentee voters to rescind ballots. A new nationwide poll has Mr. Trump pulling into the lead over Secretary Clinton. In the ABC News Washington Post tracking survey of likely voters, Trump has 46%, Clinton 45%. It's the first time he's led in this poll since May. The survey has a margin of error of 3 percentage points. Chu Soon-sil, who's accused of acting as South Korea's so-called shadow president, has been jailed under emergency detention laws. That's according to the Washington Post, which says prosecutors want to know how much influence she's had over President Park Geun-hye, her friend of more than 40 years. Choi's father was a cult leader who was close to President Park's father, a military dictator who ruled South Korea in the 1960s and 70s. Choi is suspected of amassing an illicit fortune because of her close ties to President Park. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. Scarlet, Matt, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mark Crumpton in the newsroom. Now, let's get a recap of today's market action. We had indexes trading about even at the open, and then losses accelerated throughout the day, bouncing off of their lows around 2:30, 3 o'clock, and the Dow ended still down 105 points at 18,037. The S&P down 2/3% at 2111, and the NASDAQ down 2/3% as well at 50.
It could have been much worse, because at one point the Dow, I mean, you know, even at its worst, it was still about a 1% sell-off, which is not the end of the world or anything. But at one point, the Dow was down close to 200, perhaps some of the jitters being attributed to the election, the uncertainty that's creeping into the market over the last several days.
And as far as individual stocks, the Wall Street Journal really moving Valiant shares, saying that its Salix unit is up for sale and could get from Takeda as much as $10 billion. The Journal also says that someone else is bidding on the Salix unit, which sells gastrointestinal drugs. So very interesting scoop there, although we had a scoop yesterday here at Bloomberg News that drove the stock down. So a bit of a seesaw for Valiant, a stock that's gotten crushed so hard this year.
Also,
it's lost 3/4 of its value.
Also, Tesla out after the bell saying that the Solar City acquisition will actually be accretive to the company's balance sheet. To the tune of over, I think, close to $500 million. But that's not moving the market very much. I think investors are a little skeptical that this is like a meaningful change. Stock virtually unchanged after that.
Yeah, sure. And investors have been skeptical of this since the get-go. Okay. They're saying it's going to add $1 billion to sales next year. We'll see about that. If you take a look at Tesla's free cash flow, or the cash burn is what it really is. It was only free cash flow in the last quarter. But the question is, can they turn this around? Is adding Solar City to the mix when they really need to focus on building Model 3s? This is an argument Corey Johnson would make as a rival of Tesla. Would not necessarily be a good thing and would really distract them. Now, I'll go to Scarlet for some numbers don't lie. Scar?
All right. Thank you so much, Matt. Facebook is set to report earnings after the U.S. closing bell on Wednesday. Founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg says he wants Facebook to be a video-first company as video helps to fuel growth in mobile advertising. So let's dig into Facebook in today's The Numbers Don't Lie. So Facebook Nation is huge, as you can see from the user breakdown over the last 3 years. You've got daily active users, which is the yellow bars, mobile monthly active users, the orange bars, and then total monthly active users, which are the blue bars. hours, which amounts to 1.7 million at last count. Billion with a B. Mobile users are critical, of course, since Facebook gets 84% of its advertising revenue from handheld devices. Now, the company has morphed from the world's biggest social network to the owner of popular mobile apps ranging from Facebook to WhatsApp, Messenger to Instagram. Each of these has more than 1 billion users, except for Instagram, which has 500 million. Facebook is capitalizing on all of these eyeballs. Its average revenue per user rose almost 36% in the second quarter to $3.82. Now, the metric for North America jumped almost 54%, while Europe grew 38%. Facebook, however, not immune from controversy. Last month, you'll recall that the company said it overestimated the average viewing time for video ads over the past 2 years. And this matters because big brands are pouring ad dollars online, with almost half of all spending being directed to Google and Facebook alone. Now, one specific area that's attracting money is Instagram. Facebook's photo sharing app is expected to see a surge in ad revenue over the next few years. Another potential revenue driver is WhatsApp. The number of people using messaging services globally, which is this chart right here, may top 2 billion in 2018. Now, Facebook has yet to really monetize its different messaging platforms, but if it is able to crack the code on them, it stands to garner the largest share of messaging revenue around the world. These distinct apps and potential streams of money allow Facebook to ramp up its investment in more futuristic initiatives such as virtual reality and connecting the world to the internet. We'll follow and break Facebook's earnings after Wednesday's U.S. closing bell. Matt?
Turning to politics now, what'd you miss? As if the election didn't feel long enough, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are arming up for a possible post-election day showdown. Both campaigns are deploying volunteers and lawyers across the country as polls start to tighten. Here now to talk about what to expect is Margaret Talov of Bloomberg Politics. So it's not going to be over soon. I mean, it can't be over soon enough, let's be honest. But it's not going to be possibly completely over on November 8th.
It might be over on November 8th, and that probably depends on how close or wide a win posts. First of all, it's politically much easier to argue for a recount or contesting an election if everybody says, well, wait, it's really, really close, right? But also legally, it's much easier. In some states, you need a very close margin, like 1% or less, to get an automatic recount. In other states, it needs to be pretty close to make any kind of realistic argument before a court or through the recount methods to get a recount or to challenge the results.
All right, let's talk about what's going on right now ahead of that. You know, we'll see how close it is. The general gist is it feels like Trump is really gaining momentum. Obviously, the market seems to be thinking that. If you look at various market proxies of that, lots of polls show it's tightening. What's going on? Is this just him consolidating Republicans? Is he taking people who are actually previously on the fence? What seems to be driving these better poll numbers?
Yeah, there's really two tiers of polls to look at, and one are the national polls, which kind of reflect the mood and uncertainty. And the second one, which is more important tactically speaking for the campaigns, are those battleground state polls. Nationally, indisputably, there's a tightening of this race. How much of it is because of the FBI revelations? How much of it is because Trump kind of went to the bottom on the groping scandal and has moved on, and the Republicans are coming home and rallying around him? But, you know, the question for the Clinton campaign, and you're starting to see this because now they're going back into ads, the states that they thought were safe, doing six-figure ads in places like Colorado, Virginia, is that those margins are tightening enough in some of those important battleground states that it gives them cause for concern, if not panic. And so Trump is trying to seize on this group of kind of weak Clinton voters who, are not high propensity voters, or voters who like Clinton only because they don't like Trump. If you're a hardcore Clinton fan and you're likely to vote anyway, those people are gone. Most people are decided who they prefer. The question is, do the people who marginally prefer Clinton feel as motivated to turn out to the polls? And that's who Donald Trump is going after right now.
And when it comes to these weak Clinton voters or even undecideds, what's the best way for Trump to motivate them? Is it through just talking up all of Hillary Clinton's, what he calls alleged crimes, or what he insists are crimes and what are alleged crimes at this point? Or is it to talk policy, for instance, to slam Obamacare, since she would be carrying on President Obama's legacy?
Right, you're really smart to point that out. We did see him in Pennsylvania today as Obamacare comes up for enrollment, which is sort of a deadly timing coincidence for the Democrats. But hitting on this notion that if he's president, he's going to call some sort of a special session and somehow repeal Obamacare. But so that's a policy front that he's hitting, right? And the point of that is just to show that he's serious about policy and understands it, really more than anything else. The other is this sort of vague notion that unsettles even many people who like Hillary Clinton, the idea of Clinton drama, Bill Clinton White House drama, and the idea that that would be carried over. And Donald Trump is certainly testing that message now.
There's been such a crazy election season. The FBI news from Friday was shocking, but in a way it wasn't shocking because we come to expect this. What's your guess? You think there's one more shocking twist in the next week?
The third shoe to drop?
Is there going to be one more final shoe to drop before Election Day?
There very well could be. The Clinton campaign, in their own minds, were planning for 3, 4, 5 potential attacks against her on any front, her health, Bill Clinton's record as, president. So this is not necessarily the one they saw coming. Certainly, I think they are prepared for more, and we have yet to see what the pro-Clinton forces, third-party groups and such have in their pockets.
Speaking of Bill Clinton, just a quick question. What do you think about the FBI tweeting out the release of its Mark Rich investigation? Remember, he pardoned that super billionaire after his wife gave so much money to the Clintons.
Right, 15 years ago, right? So, again, this seems to be more timing than anything else. This is in response to a FOIA request, and we saw some documents about Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, also posted earlier in October. But, boy, talk about the pile-on. The timing really couldn't be worse for the Clinton campaign.
All right, Margaret, thanks so much. Exciting job right now. Margaret Talov of Bloomberg Politics out of Washington.
Coming up, it's not only the politicians who are planning for their post-election era. Media networks are also trying to figure out how to keep the audiences watching once the polls close on this election season. This is Bloomberg. What you missed, the twists and turns of the 2016 presidential election has delivered blockbuster ratings for cable news outlets like CNN and Fox News. But can these networks hang on to viewers after November 8th? Let's ask Bloomberg's Jerry Smith, who co-wrote a story on this. Lots of people have said this election is like the greatest reality show ever.
Or the worst.
Plus the future of Western civilization is arguably at stake. Either way. So then what do they do, if we just go back to normal? Why would anyone watch those networks?
Yeah, what do you do for an encore?
Right.
I think that's the big question. I mean, this whole election season's just been a huge rating bonanza for CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. We've seen that CNN's actually made some real inroads on Fox's
in terms
lead.
of gaining share, not just everyone going up.
Yeah, in terms of like the younger demographic, they've actually started to gain and narrow the gap a little bit with Fox. So now, November 9th, all the networks have got to figure out how do we try to hold on to as much of this audience as we can, and we've seen historically that most of those viewers they have a lot of trouble hanging on to.
So keeping that in mind, do we presume that these networks will spend more or spend less? Because we know they probably had to ramp up on staff because of the election coverage. Are they going to start cutting staff right away, or will they hire different people after the elections?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways that it might. I mean, Time Warner's executives have said that CNN might actually be, in some ways, more profitable next year because they don't have to spend quite so much money on sending out all these correspondents to follow all the different candidates. You see CNN and Fox being number 1 and 2. They're sort of going in different directions post-election. CNN has really focused on doing a lot more original series. They have a show, Anthony Bourdain, for example, Parts Unknown, has been
TV shows.
Yeah, I mean, this is an original show, and it's not. The idea is that with CNN, they're trying to do, when the news isn't hot like it is right now in the political season, how do they sort of balance out the highs and lows? So Fox, obviously, they're in contract talks right now with Megyn Kelly, who's been a rising star through this political season. So I think that there's a lot riding on whether they can keep her around as well.
Doesn't Fox also, because of its political position, have kind of a win-win situation built in here? I mean, if Hillary wins, they can hate on her for the next 4 years. If Trump wins, they get all of the, exclusive interviews for the next 4 years. Isn't it easier for that? I mean, CNN just has to wait for some air crash, after this, because what else are they going to be covering?
Right. I mean, that's actually, you've seen that when an ideological cable news network, when the opposing parties in the White House, their ratings are better. So, there's talked to analysts who said, yeah, if Hillary wins, then Fox would probably do better in the ratings.
What's your assessment of the prospects for a Trump TV network or a web network in the event that he loses? Do you think that something like that is likely to happen, and could it, say, bleed some viewers away from Fox?
I think it's be very hard for Trump to launch a cable network right now for various reasons. I think that the cable industry is really in decline, and the Comcasts of the world are not really that interested in having more cable channels added to their lineup. If Trump does decide to launch some sort of media company, I think it's more likely to look something like what Glenn Beck did, where it's a subscription video service. I mean, he got around 300 or 400,000 subscribers. And as we saw in our Business Week story this week, Trump's already been, his camp has been adding a lot of data on voters that he could use to monetize and create a media network later.
So no voters, voters don't like Donald Trump. Voters don't like Hillary Clinton, right? Even those that are planning on vote. Everybody likes Ivanka Trump, though, right? I mean, isn't this the shining star that's come out of this? I mean, shouldn't CNN go and hire Ivanka Trump?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's...
Won't anyone watch anything with Ivanka Trump on?
Matt Miller, I think, is saying that he would watch anything.
I think that you would be an interested viewer. Yeah, I mean, I think that if there was a Trump TV network, you would have to think about what sort of people would actually show up on there. You can't have Donald Trump on TV 24 hours a day, as much as it may seem like he is on all the time.
As much as he might want it, too.
Right. I mean, so you could potentially see someone like a Sean Hannity could have an hour, maybe Ivanka could have an hour, some of Rush Limbaugh potentially. So, those are sort of the ideas that are getting thrown out there. But, Donald Trump obviously says he's still focused on the election and doesn't have any interest in a Trump TV network at this point.
All right. Jerry Smith, Bloomberg News. Thank you very much.
Coming up next, Choi Son-sil, who is accused of acting as South Korea's shadow president, has been jailed. We dig deeper into the political scandal that is rocking South Korea. This is Bloomberg. Scarlet, what'd you miss? The influence peddling scandal rocking South Korea's President Park Geun-hye. Now, at the center of the case is her good friend Choi Son-sil, who was placed under emergency arrest early this morning. Choi is being investigated over allegedly influencing the president's political decisions, gaining access to classified information, and securing preferential treatment for her daughter at an elite women's university. Joining us now for more on this is Eurasia Group's senior Asia analyst, Scott Seaman. Scott, what does this mean for the president? Will she need to resign? Will she be impeached? We've gotten so far as the jailing of Choi Sung-il, but what's next for President Park?
I mean, as you can imagine, as this unfolds, there are lots of different scenarios that people are talking about. I think it's quite unlikely that she'll be impeached. Not only is that a pretty difficult process to pull off, but a lot of the opposition political parties are not even really talking about that as a very good option right now. There's always a possibility that she'll be forced to step down. There are people in the streets. There are more protests being planned. Pressure is definitely building on her to do something. But this is a person that has a personality that, you know, has always been stubborn, has always been strong in the face of adversity like this. So it's a real question about whether she'll be able to hold up under the pressure or whether she'll decide to cut her losses.
Scott, for people who haven't been paying close attention, summarize this scandal for people, because I think it's still pretty opaque and hard to understand. What is the core of the issue that's bringing so much pressure on the president?
So basically, the friend of the president, who has evidently been in her life for a very long time, beginning around the time when the president's father was assassinated, and then before that her mother was assassinated, has been accused of essentially meddling in the government's affairs, being seen as influencing President Park's decisions, and in the process also finding ways to financially enrich herself. And in a nutshell, people are talking about this woman as a Rasputin-type character, someone who is always been in the shadows and is kind of pulling the strings for President Park and has gotten in her head, so to speak.
So has President Park made any gains due to this, or has President Park been accused of doing anything that's seriously untoward?
You know, the funny thing about this is usually scandals in Korea revolve around corruption and politicians enriching themselves because they have the power and the position to do it. This is a weird one, though, because there really isn't any clear indication that President Park has gained financially at all from this relationship that she has. Now, the woman involved, Ms. Che, certainly is accused of enriching herself, as I said, because of her access to the president. But the scandal seems to revolve around the idea that Park has almost been brainwashed, that this woman has some sort of control over her, and before she did, her father had control over Park. And so I think where normally Koreans are quite used to scandals involving money, this is one where people are actually questioning the judgment and maybe even the mental health of their president.
So, Scott, if the president is unlikely to step down because she's stubborn and the opposition party is unlikely to impeach her, what does that mean for South Korea's economy? Because this drags on and her term doesn't end until early 2018. How does this affect the economy?
Right. So, you know, if she doesn't step down and if she's not impeached, obviously she'll remain in office. I think the likeliest scenario is that they'll find a way to marginalize her. They'll have the prime minister take on a bigger role for policymaking, for example. And they may give her a ceremonial role or keep her in some capacity, but obviously her political capital is essentially zero now. So her ability to continue pushing forward on a lot of her reforms, a lot of those right now have been focused on labor reforms. That's not anything she's going to be making any progress on in the near term. The economy, you know, it's funny because there are a lot of economists and people outside Korea that say it's actually not in such bad shape. But Koreans themselves seem to have a much darker picture. So the danger is twofold. One, that the government really won't be able to do a lot on policy.
Right.
And two, that people will think that a situation that is already worse is even going to get worse now given that the politics and the government may be paralyzed.
All right. Scott Seaman of Eurasia Group joining us from Washington. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, what you need to know to gear up for tomorrow's trading day. This is Bloomberg.
A quick programming note here. Have you ever wondered what terminal rate or contango mean? Lucky for you, we're going to demystify these terms. Starting this Friday, we're going to deconstruct this kind of jargon for you. But we need ideas from you. Scarlet is already tweeting it out. Send them to us on Twitter under the hashtag WDYM.
And don't miss this tomorrow Fed special at 2 p.m.
This is Bloomberg.
I'm John Heilman.
And I'm Mark Halpern. And with all due respect to 7-Eleven and Cumberland Farms, apparently Donald Trump is a Wawa man. We are just one very endless week away from Election Day, folks. I'm out here in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where Donald Trump is holding a rally later tonight as questions swirl about whether his narrow path to the presidency is widening maybe just a bit. Both the GOP nominee and Hillary Clinton are making a final push for votes everywhere. Trump announced today that he is spending $25 million over the next few days on TV ads here in the Badger State and in other blue states, including Colorado, Virginia, Michigan, and New Mexico. Clinton's campaign, in turn, is making six-figure buys in each of those states which not too long ago seemed safely in her column. Clinton surrogates are also campaigning in some of those same states where Trump is now seemingly on a bit of offense. Here in Wisconsin, Tim Kaine is appearing, Bill Clinton going to Colorado. Hillary Clinton today had some harsh words for her political opponent, and this explanation about why the race might get more negative before it's over. At a rally today, Clinton went back to her tried and true tactic of this campaign for her. She appeared on stage with the Miss Universe pageant winner, Alicia Machado, and brought up the subject of Trump and women.
Contestants say that Donald Trump came in to look at them when they were changing. Some of them were just 15 years old. We cannot hide from this. We've got to be willing to face it. This man wants to be president of the United States of America.
Today, a new ABC News Washington Post tracking poll, the data from that survey, has Trump now leading Clinton by 1% nationally. That's, of course, within the margin of error, but the symbolism of Trump being ahead after being well behind in that poll. And amid everybody wondering if the revived FBI probe into Clinton's email practices might be doing her some damage, her campaign says it raised $11.3 million online in the past 72 hours. So, John, 7 days left. Is there any real evidence that Trump is catching up?
Well, Mark, we are still suffering a little bit from a paucity of polling here that really, for the first time ever, it seems like we'd want to know what's going on more than ever right now, and we're still a little bit fumbling our way towards figuring out what the impact of the Comey letter has been. Look, there's the ABC Washington Post poll that's, has Trump ahead by 1 right now. Other than that, which everyone's hanging a lot on right now, if you look across all the other polling, there's no doubt that the race is tightening a little bit, but there's not a compelling case that it's tightening a lot so far.
I think the most compelling case would come from the Clinton side. They're going back on TV in some of these states. They're sending surrogates, as I said, Bill Clinton to Colorado, Tim Kaine here to Wisconsin. That doesn't mean they're panicking. It doesn't even mean that their numbers are showing a decline in her lead. It simply could mean they're being careful. Trump's going on offense in these places. Why not play defense? So I don't think we can jump to the conclusion that that's in any way decisively meaningful. But it does suggest, if they weren't the least bit worried, for instance, about Wisconsin or about Colorado or Michigan, they wouldn't be trying to buttress themselves there. They'd be focusing on winning North Carolina, say, and ending Trump's chances.
Well, one of the things that's true is that the Clinton campaign has amassed a really large stockpile of dollars over the course of the last 15, 16, 18 months. And we're now at the point where there's no point in holding on to that money. You might as well spend it if you have it. So I tend to think that, that they have always said the race was going to be tight. And if we're now in the last 7 days, again, don't leave a, as they say, don't leave a bullet in the chamber that you don't fire when it comes to ads. That's what those things are. They're bullets. So why not get on the air?
You're totally right about the money. If they've got enough to flood the airways and saturate in the key battlegrounds, of course. It's those visits, though. Bill Clinton's time is very valuable. The fact that they're sending him to Colorado. Tim Kaine's time, very valuable. The fact that they're sending him to Wisconsin means, again, that they're at least keeping an eye on those states. And the Trump campaign today said in a conference call with the RNC, with the press this afternoon, that their path involves winning the big four of Florida, Ohio, Iowa, and North Carolina. But the reality is, if they lose North Carolina, we said yesterday, could break their back. Maybe they're going to find a replacement here in Wisconsin. Maybe. But she's still ahead.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And the other thing that's really clear is that we're not anymore talking about Georgia and Texas and the Democrats trying to expand the map. There's no question about that. All right. Today is November the 1st, which obviously means it's the first day of open enrollment for Obamacare. This comes just a week after news that some people will see shocking rate hikes, or at least substantial rate hikes, and fewer insurance options under the Affordable Care Act next year. A storyline that the Trump campaign considers to be something of a gift in this final stretch of the election. That delight was on full display today in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, where Donald Trump and his running mate Mike Pence called for health care policy changes, including the end of individual mandates and the ability for Americans to shop for insurance plans across state lines.
Before it was called Obamacare, it was called Hillary Care. Even former President Bill Clinton said, costs are going up, coverage is going down. It's the craziest thing in the world. I guess even with the Clintons, sometimes truth happens. President Obama said, here's the quote, when one of these companies comes out with a new smartphone that has a few bugs, what do? They fix it. They upgrade it. Unless it catches fire, then they pull it off the market. Well, what a coincidence, Mr. President, because that's exactly what we're going to do with Obamacare. We're going to pull it off the market so it stops burning up our wallets.
The president said if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, which may go down as one of the great political lies of the century. She wants to put the government totally in charge of health care in America. If we don't repeal and replace Obamacare, we will destroy American health care forever. It's one of the single most important reasons why we must win on November 8th.
There has not been much polling about how news of these rate hikes is affecting the popularity of Obamacare. But, Mark, is your view at this point that this is a sleeper issue that might make a real difference in this presidential race?
Well, that seems to certainly be the view of the Republicans. Of course, they have hammered on the Affordable Care Act since it passed. The polling, as you and I have discussed many times, it's more negative than positive about the law. It certainly energizes the Republican base. It unites all Republicans, really, almost every case. It unites a lot of independents who don't like it, particularly business people. And the Trump campaign claims this issue, last Monday when this broke, is what started to turn things, they say, in their favor. So I think an issue involving the real lives of real people that plays into, even though a lot of the coverage has overstated the extent of the hikes, the extent of the problem, I think this may be the sleeper issue right now that Republicans ride through direct mail and digital, et cetera, to an advantage with a lot of voters.
Yeah, I disagree, and for a couple reasons. One, if there was a time when Obamacare was going to be a decisive issue, it should have been in 2012. We saw what happened there. It did not sink Barack Obama in 2012. The law was more unpopular than
That's
than
because
it is now.
Mitt Romney was a horrible messenger on health care.
Well, you could argue, and that gets to our next question. Is Donald Trump a great messenger on this? I don't think so. In addition to the fact that he has no alternative, I'll just point out that he was just lying kind of gratuitously in that clip we showed where he said that Hillary Clinton wants to have the government take over all of health care in America. That's just blatantly false. He also, as I said, doesn't have an alternative. But the other thing that's true is that you're right. Obamacare is more unpopular than it is popular. More people dislike it than like it. But the numbers are, it's not that much more unpopular, which is to say the split between favorable and unfavorable is only a few points. And it's been really stable for now 2 or 3 years, the split. High 40s versus mid to low 40s on the unfav versus fav. And I just don't think that what has happened last week is going to radically change that to the point where it's really going to matter on election day.
Just let me be clear. I know we got to go, but let me be clear.
Yeah,
I don't think it's a silver bullet. I don't think it's going to achieve some huge game changer. All I'm saying is between Bill Clinton and WikiLeaks, the Comey comment, and health care, I think health care may be the one that, to the extent Trump is gaining, is helping him the most.
Okay. All right. I'll take that under advisement as your doctor. Up next, Russia and taxes, a Trump tale. We'll be right back. There has been a truckload of unhappy headlines for Donald Trump just in the past 24 to 36 hours, and lucky us, they fit nicely into two categories. Some have to do with Donald Trump's finances. We will get to those in a moment. But first, Mother Russia. In the past 24 hours, we've read count them, four different reports examining potential ties between Trump world and what Mitt Romney likes to call our nation's biggest geopolitical foe. First, we got Mother Jones with a story that cites, quote, a veteran spy who specializes in Russian counterintelligence. That story says the FBI received investigation about the Russian government allegedly trying to co-opt and help Trump over the past 5 years. NBC News also ran a story that says federal authorities have been looking into former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort's business dealings in Russia, though not as a criminal matter. Meanwhile, Slate says that computer scientists have been looking into possible communication between a server belonging to Trump and two servers registered to a major Russian bank. But in the New York Times, with its own Soviet-inspired piece yesterday, they knocked down that theory, reporting that while the FBI has been looking into multiple leads involving Trump and Russia, including that server business, no evidence has emerged that links the GOP candidate or any of his inner circle directly to the Russian government. So, Mark, there's a mouthful that I just read. Some of these reports contradict each other. All have been denied. My questions to you are the following. Is there any there? And if so, will it matter in the outcome of this presidential race?
Well, there's no doubt that after this election, the press is going to have to do a lot of soul searching about its failure to pursue a lot of these Trump stories over the course of a year and a half. There's a lot of stories that didn't get enough coverage that should have gone from print to television. In this case, on this bundle of stories, I think Trump's praise of Putin, Trump's failure to put out his tax returns to disclose whether he's got dealings in Russia that he's denied, I think those are the big Russia stories that have some tangibility. This swirl of stories, I think, probably won't matter much. And based on what we know, I'm not sure any of them do. If some of them turned out to be true, they'd be a huge deal. But right. I don't think there's enough there right now to say that they are.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I agree with really almost everything you just said. It is one of the great outrages of this campaign, and there have been many of them, and I've beat this drum for a long time, that Donald Trump did not put out his tax returns. And we were, as much as we called for it, we couldn't get any leverage on that.
The world should have come to a halt.
Yeah, well, you know, it would have been nice if it had. And the truth is that a big part of the reason why, when people say, well, why do you want to see the tax returns? Because we really want to know. Is Donald Trump in bed with Russia? Does he owe them money? What are the financial connections? Because of the fact that he has had such a strange, consistent fondness for Vladimir Putin. And given that the Russians, according to all the national security and intelligence agencies, are responsible for these hacks that have consumed so much of our time, trying to influence our election in this way, we should really know more about a lot of the things that these stories glance at, get at. There's some, as I said, some contradiction. But, man, this is something that still feels really, really suspicious and hinky to me.
Yeah. When Trump failed to denounce Putin when asked about his murdering of journalists,
right.
I really do think in a campaign filled with low points, that was really one of the low points. As somebody who claims the mantle of Ronald Reagan and wants to associate himself with Ronald Reagan to have replied the way he did. So I think Trump's overall meta relationship and relationship with Russia is a big deal, should be a big deal. Yeah. But again, I don't know that any of these stories here, particularly in the context of the Comey thing, are going to break through.
Right. I'll add to the low points that's a parallel thing to that thing you mentioned, which is the notion that we had a Republican nominee or a nominee for either party saying that that Vladimir Putin is a better, stronger leader, or at least a stronger leader than the President of the United States, Barack Obama, or any President of the United States. Yeah, outrageous thing. I'm really interested. I hope someone will look into this conflict between the New York Times and that Slate story, because if that Slate story is true, that's really damning. The notion of a server linked up directly to a Russian bank, that would really get us into some interesting territory, and I don't really understand how those two stories could come to such opposite conclusions on that front.
Right. All right. Confusing. Here's something else a little bit confusing. Donald Trump's financial dealings, they are once again making news in various ways in this presidential race. There's another New York Times story out today. It describes documents that report to show that back in the early 90s, Trump used a sketchy tax avoidance maneuver around the time his Atlantic City casinos were filing for bankruptcy. The move would have saved Trump tens of millions of dollars in federal income tax, and the documents obtained, cited by the Times, purportedly show that even Trump's own lawyers called the gambit legally questionable. Two other stories along the same lines. The Washington Post had a story, one that came out amidst the Comey comment the other day from the great David Fahrenthold. It was a Fahrenthold classic. It raises more questions about Trump's charitable giving claims. The other Washington Post story is a Matea Gold Standard about Trump apparently refusing, or at least reevaluating, payment to his campaign pollster, Tony Fabrizio. So, John, same question as we asked about the Russia stuff. Is there any there on these financial stories, and will any of them matter in the last week?
Well, I think the New York Times piece is on the basis of how much it gets into this detail of another, it's now the second big New York Times piece that suggests that Donald Trump has played the tax system in a way that no normal human being could and has avoided paying taxes for many, many years. I think that story is as devastating, maybe more devastating than the first one, but suggested that he could have not paid taxes for many, many years. I think that look, Donald Trump's hiding his tax returns. We just talked about this in the last topic. He's hiding them for a reason. It seems to be circumstantially clear that the reason he's hiding them and has been hiding them for the entire time is the fact that he hasn't paid basically any taxes for a really long time, and that he understands that the political damage from that would be huge, and that he's willing to take the damage of not being disclosive rather than taking the damage of what if it was all laid bare for people to see. I'm glad the Times has been on this story, and I think for some number of people in the country, this is the kind of thing that is disqualifying, or as disqualifying as anything else Trump has done.
Yep. I urge voters to read the Washington Post two stories as well as that Times story. They're all really interesting. They give you a fuller picture of Donald Trump. I don't think any of them, again, are going to be game changers here in the last week, but they're all important and good for them to continue to pursue investigative journalism all the way through. I will say again, for Republicans and others who don't like the fact that Donald Trump is the nominee, the people who did their opposition research for the other 16 candidates all need to wonder and ask themselves, how could they not have found this stuff?
Yeah. All right. When we come back, we'll take a swing through the polling jungle with our favorite survey monkey man right after this.
Welcome back to the Badger State. Election Day is a week away. We're keeping a close eye, of course, on all the polls, as are you. So is our next guest. Joining us now from Stanford, California is John Cohen. He's the Senior VP of survey research at SurveyMonkey, whose latest poll, along with NBC News, shows Clinton with a 6-point national lead in the four-way. We had him on 2 weeks ago when you had a rosy projection for Hillary Clinton. There was talk back then of her breaking 300 electoral votes, etc. All right, so we're 2 weeks later. We're one email bombshell later. How are things looking?
Well, as you said, last time we were talking about could she reach 400, actually, I think was the question at the time. And now we're talking about how she can solidify her path to 270. We were doing a 50-state tracking poll at SurveyMonkey, and in today's map that we released, she's at 262. So she really has to recover a little bit to get past the 270 and beyond to create a mandate.
So, John, is this the reason this is tightening? Is this being driven mainly by the Comey letter, or is this a natural tightening?
You know, we're doing a 7-day track, so we're 3.5 days, pre-Comey and 3.5 days, post. And so we don't yet know whether we're looking at noise or not. At the state level, we're talking about little small changes. She's, kind of a little ahead in some toss-up states that, if she gets them all, she'll be well into the 300s again. So we're going to kind of keep watching day by day as we tick into Election Day. But right now, the map certainly looks different. I think the main issue is the email issue is just a bad one for her. 83% of likely voters think it was inappropriate that she used a private email server when she was Secretary of State. So when the attention's on her and with her historic unpopularity, she's more vulnerable. When, by the flip side, you talked about all the stories in your last segment about Donald Trump. When the focus is on him, he suffers because he also has, unfavorability ratings just as high as hers.
So, John, I'm here in Wisconsin where Trump and Pence are coming in just a little bit, and we saw him in Michigan yesterday, out in New Mexico. Is your sense that those states have moved at all and that the Trump campaign has some reasonable chance of winning one or more of them? Or is this out of desperation because they can't find 270 electoral votes in their older plan?
Yeah, we actually have had Wisconsin much closer than anyone else, I think. We have Clinton up just a single percentage point in Wisconsin in our data today. That's down from leaning in her direction just a few days ago. So, again, we'll have to see over the coming days whether it's, truly in that toss-up category, if it moves more solidly back in Clinton's camp. But it's certainly vulnerable. And, the email issue and the focus on it kind of makes, the turnout in focus for the Clinton campaign. 15% of Clinton's own voters think the email issue and the FBI's reopening the case is a major issue to discuss, not simply a distraction.
So, John, I think the last time when we were talking about the 400 electoral vote question around Hillary Clinton, one of the ways we were talking about it was in the context of a bunch of expansion/reach states for Democrats: Utah, Arizona, Texas, Georgia. Are those now off the table for Hillary Clinton, or are some of those still in play?
Well, as of today, Texas is off the table, but Georgia and Arizona are still there. Of course, that's not the campaign's main focus now. It's in Wisconsin, as Mark mentioned. It's even in Michigan, where our data show that as a toss-up. And it's in some softening in Colorado and North Carolina, which she needs to shore up in the final days.
Can you just answer about Utah, too? I'm just interested in that one because it's such a weird race.
Yeah, so we actually have Trump up a few points over Clinton and then a few points more over McMullen. But McMullen's clearly gained momentum over the coming weeks, but we're asking that, every day as we are everywhere else.
No.
John, take a moment and explain to people the methodology that SurveyMonkey uses.
Sure. So, the key to any good survey these days is a good random sample. And we have the luxury at SurveyMonkey of having 3 million respondents a day to a SurveyMonkey survey, not that I send out, but that are sent out by, friends that you may have, kind of to what to bring to a barbecue, what to bring to another party or your employer or, some company you buy something from. And what we're doing is doing random sampling on the back of those surveys and getting estimates, on a rolling basis. We've interviewed about 1 million people over the course of this campaign, and now we're doing daily in the states. It's a really unprecedented effort as far as polling goes. We're doing not only all 50 states, but we just published a little while ago, results in all 34 Senate races and all the gubernatorial contests as well. So it's a major effort, that we're sharing those learnings as well as the results on a daily basis.
So, John, in a phrase or two, how would you evaluate Donald Trump's chances of winning 270 electoral votes?
Still extraordinarily slim, but there's now uncertainty in the contest where there wasn't when I was last on the program.
Okay. John Cohen, the great John Cohen, thank you very much. You just heard about the numbers in this contest. When we come back, we're going to talk about the strategy right after this.
and when Hillary is president, what do you think will be the female equivalent of "you weren't born in this country"?
That's an interesting question.
Thank you. I have a lot of those.
I think the equivalent will be she's tired, she's moody, she's being emotional.
There's just something about her.
There's something about her. When men are ambitious, it's just taken for granted. Well, of course they should be ambitious. When women are ambitious, why? That theme, I think, will continue throughout her presidency, and it's contributed to this notion that somehow she is hiding something.
That was President Obama on TBS's Full Frontal with Samantha Bee last night. Joining us now is Trump's senior advisor, A.J. Delgado, and former Congressman and Clinton supporter, Harold Ford Jr. Hi, guys. How are you? How's it going? What'd you think about that, Obama and Bee there?
He's always entertaining. She's a talented comedian, so it's always nice to have a sitting president comment with a little bit of humor on the election.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
So tell me about where you think the race is right now. You're here, obviously, representing the Trump campaign. What do you think? We've been talking about it all half of the show. Where do you think it is?
I think we could all agree it's tightening to Mr. Trump's favor. We saw a huge swing, that's an understatement, with the ABC poll, where we were down by, 13 points about a week ago, and now up 1. Rasmussen were tied, and in certain swing states, it's a dead heat. She's losing her lead in Virginia. This is not looking good for Hillary Clinton.
Harold, what do you think about that?
Well, I think there's no doubt the numbers have tightened. We remain confident in all the battlegrounds. I think there's a lot for Mr. Trump to overcome here in these last few days. Put aside this weekend story regarding Mr. Comey, the facts of the race don't change, and the positions that she's taken and that Mr. Trump has taken in the direction they want to take the country, none of that has changed. So if on Tuesday or Wednesday of last week you felt that Hillary Clinton was best positioned to lead the country, to make us safer and stronger again and more prosperous, nothing has changed between now and last Wednesday that would cause any voter to say, I don't believe she's capable of doing that.
We just talked earlier about this in the show, Harold, about the kind of panoply of negative headlines, bad stories about Donald Trump, some related to Russia, some related to his taxes, some related to other financial matters. If you were running the Clinton campaign, which you're not, what would you want to focus on among those stories to drive the narrative over the course of the last 6 or 7 days?
I think that the fact that Mr. Trump refuses to release tax returns, the fact that Mr. Trump has had business dealings where he's had partners, old partners of his, say that I didn't feel like I was treated fairly by him. I would focus there, if I were her, some on the negative part, but I would take this last few days to lay out where I want to take the country. I think the mandate that she's going to have is going to be predicated not only on making clear why Donald Trump is not fit to be president. I think that narrative is out there. No disrespect to AJ, but I think that narrative on our side has been put out there. I think for her to have a mandate when she's elected, she's got to remind people about her infrastructure spend. She's got to remind people about raising wages. She's got to remind middle-class families this is about empowering and re-empowering you through making health care more affordable, through making education more accessible, good education options. So I would get back to saying I'm ready to be president. I'm ready to manage world affairs on America's behalf and ready to grow this economy in a way to build on the successes of the last 8 years.
AJ, do you want to respond?
Got to disagree with that, Harold, with all due respect. No pun intended. I do think the last few days have changed things for voters. I think when we have hundreds of thousands of emails that have ended up on Anthony Weiner's laptop, a man of very dubious character, we have to ask from a national security standpoint, which is a top issue for nearly every American voter, how could this person then be elected to serve at the highest levels of office, at the highest levels of handling classified information? She's already shown herself inept at being able to do that, and this just proves it. And also, as far as the mandate, it's really Mr. Trump who, for the past year, has been traveling across the country, laying out specific plans, even plans on issues as detailed as combating the heroin epidemic we're facing in this country. I don't hear Hillary Clinton speaking about that. On jobs, on trade, on immigration, on border security. I remember reading one independent article that said Hillary Clinton's a great candidate, but a policy-free one. And I thought that was just such an astute observation. She always speaks in these vague platitudes about, well, raising wages and all these things she will promise, but is almost policy and specifics free. It's odd.
She's got about 800 pages of policy on her website compared to about 100 on yours,
and
right?
you judge it based on the website?
Well, she does have policies that are on the record. She's put them out.
You should check, speaking of her website, you should check.
In a fair amount of detail, which you guys have not really done.
Her immigration immigration policy on her website, John, is frightening to any American voter that's concerned about immigration and security at the border.
We can say a lot of things about Secretary Clinton, but I think one that's unfair thing to say is she's not been specific about policies over the course of her public life. In fact, I think she's probably been too specific at times and drawn voters to think that maybe she's not as exciting a candidate because that's where her focus has been. Again,
Obamacare, do you take credit then as she does for Obamacare, which has been proven to be a disaster this month?
Well, it hadn't been proven to be a disaster. It needs to be
the
fixed.
Policy raises. Come on,
but she's indicated she's ready to fix part of it, and so is President Obama. But that's President Obama's the Affordable Care Act.
No, she said, let's be fair, she recently tweeted before they called it Obamacare, they called it Hillary Care. So it's on her. She owned it.
So if one of the differences between our campaigns is whether or not we're going to ensure that the 23 million Americans who have health insurance now as a result of the Affordable Care Act continues, and I'll take that. I'll embrace that. Does it need to be fixed going forward? Secretary Clinton is committed to doing it. Mark, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Here comes Mark.
That's okay. Harold, is there any way to look at the fact that Bill Clinton's going to Colorado, that Tim Kaine is here in Wisconsin, that the Clinton campaign is going up with paid media in those states and a couple others? Is there any way to read that except concern from the Clinton campaign that Trump may be threatening in these states?
We're near the end of a campaign, and I think that they understand that turnout and every vote matters. So I would hope you could read what you may want to read into it, but I don't think there's any doubt the race is tightened. I think if you were to ask a lot of Clinton operatives and those very close to the campaign day to day if they were surprised by this, I think most would say no. There's no doubt there was surprise last week with the way Mr. Comey decided to inform Congress and voters as to what he was doing and the way in which he described it, so I don't deny that. But I don't think anyone should be surprised that our top operatives and our best campaign principles are out in the most competitive states. So I read it as we need to win those states, and we send our best people there.
Okay, AJ, I know you've been asked this before. I'm going to make one last try. Mr. Trump doesn't want to release his tax returns, he says, because he's under audit. Why can't he release for every year simply his income, his effective federal tax rate, and his charitable deduction amounts?
Because that's all intertwined with the audit. And Mark, with all due respect, again, I keep saying that phrase, really the only tax return that matters to the American voter at the end of the day is my own and those of my friends and families. It's only Donald Trump that has a plan to put more money back in our pockets, return those jobs we've lost, and create more jobs. I don't think this is a big issue for the American public. It is for the media that is intent on bringing down Mr. Trump with the silliness of the tax returns. We're too busy caring about our own tax returns to worry about that.
Releasing those numbers have nothing to do with the audit. I'd urge you to ask him to release those so people could have a little bit more information, as they have about every general election presidential candidate.
As an attorney myself, I can tell you,
those have any
implication
for the
audit? I would never
audit?
suggest somebody release this. And I can't believe a week into the election, we're discussing this rather than the 650,000 emails that ended up on Anthony Weiner's laptop, which is a huge national security concern for voters. Don't know why we're still on that topic.
We're discussing both. We got less than 30 seconds. Ask you each for a headline. What will the headline be for a newspaper the day after the election? Harold?
Clinton wins, and mandate is understood. Raise wages and empower the middle class.
AJ?
People's champion wins in a landslide. America wins.
Clinton wins again.
You one headline, right? You said per person. Typical Clinton cheat over here.
We just met too. Wow.
Right?
Just met. Wow.
She keeps saying, with all due respect, I don't think she knows what that phrase means, Harold.
Wow.
That's a little harsh. I think neither one of you guys should be in the headline writing business. AJ Delgado, Harold Ford Jr., thank you both for coming on. Coming up, we have Ralston Reports, the great John Ralston Reports next. And if you're watching this in Washington, D.C., you can listen to us on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We'll be right back.
in Wisconsin in time for our very own customized Ralston Report. With us from Vegas, John Ralston, the editor of the eponymous Ralston Reports, a columnist at the Reno Gazette-Journal, and a contributing editor at the Politico. John, welcome. What is going on in the U.S. Senate race there for Harry Reid's seat, and how is that impacting potentially the presidential race?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I guess I have to tell you that I think this is the most amazing Senate race that I've covered. And you guys know I've covered every one since 1986. It's going to be a $100 million race, more outside spending than I've ever seen. And I really think it could go either way still. And it essentially has boiled down to Joe Heck, not versus Catherine Cortez Masto, but Joe Heck versus Harry Reid. Harry Reid has been all over this race, in the background on one side and in the foreground on the Republican side. And while the early voting numbers don't look good for the Republicans, remember what happened in 2012. Obama won the state by almost 7, and Dean Heller pulled out the Senate race by 12,000 votes.
So, John, is the fact that the Senate race is competitive, the kind of coalition the two Senate candidates are trying to put together, does that advantage either of the presidential candidates?
You know, it's interesting, Mark, because I think they're totally divorced from each other in many ways, and not just because Heck divorced himself from Trump, which initially caused him a lot of problems, even his campaign would admit, but doesn't really now. The coordinated campaign between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Reid Democratic machine has been so focused on getting out the Democratic base, which I think is going 90% for Clinton, 90% for Cortez Masto. And from what I understand, Heck so far is mirroring Trump, which is a real problem for him. The entire Heck strategy in this election is knowing they're going to lose early voting to hope to minimize that loss and then win on Election Day by 4 or maybe 5 points. Little margin for error there.
So, John, I want to step back and get a little bit more altitude on the discussion just on the presidential race in your state, okay? Somehow Nevada has become one of the key states for Donald Trump that he's going to have a path to get 270 electoral votes. If you looked at Barack Obama's victories in 2008 and 2012 and the demographic composition of your state, you wouldn't have thought that Nevada would be up there with places like Iowa and Ohio, much whiter states. You wouldn't have thought that would be one of the keys to Trump winning, and yet he's competitive there. So just explain to me why.
Well, it's a very good question, John, and I guess what I'd say about that, is he competitive here? I've always thought that the state leans toward Clinton for the reasons that you mentioned, the fact that the Hispanic vote is probably going to be above 20%. But I always go back to what Trump said on the night that he won the caucus here when he looked at the exit polling, and he was almost surprised, and he said what none of us would say aloud: look how I did among the poorly educated. I love the poorly educated. Nevada has a lot of poorly educated folks. There's no doubt about it. But I don't think that there's a path here for Trump unless there's a total implosion in the early voting numbers in the last 4 days. But they must have polling that shows that, because Trump was here and because they're continuing to campaign hard here with surrogates, including the great John Voight appearance tomorrow.
All right, you're looking forward to that, I'm sure. But the reality is not only are they spending time there, but the polling there has been kind of seesawed back and forth. It's kind of suggested Trump's been ahead in some polling there, and it's been tighter than you would have expected. So, again, what explains the fact that it's even in play? I mean, I would have thought that given the demographic trends, that this state would have been put away for Hillary Clinton in the way that Colorado, for instance, seems to have been put away for her months ago.
Well, I think that's a reasonable assumption. And let's assume for a second the polls are right. And I'm not so sure that's a good assumption, because you guys and I have talked about polling in Nevada for years.
Yeah.
It is not good here. It's very difficult to poll here. But here's what's going on here, and you will get some sophisticated Democrats to acknowledge this. Hillary Clinton is not Barack Obama. There was real excitement, enthusiasm. The base got out enthusiastically to vote for Barack Obama here in 2008 and 2012. There is much more dragging out of homes, having to bus people, doing things they didn't do before. There's a lot more registration in GOTV groups on the ground here on the Democratic side than there ever have been before. And there's one other phenomenon that's going on here that's going on elsewhere in early early voting. Young African Americans are not getting out to vote in the numbers that they did in 2008 and 2012.
Great John Ralston, thank you. We'll check in with you again soon, I hope. Up next, a lot of the national media is gathered here in Eau Claire, Wisconsin tonight. We wrestled two of them to the ground and had them come join us. That after these words from our sponsors. Joining me here now in Eau Claire, where Donald Trump, Mike Pence hold a rally tonight. NBC News, Katie Tur, who's inside the event. And with me side by side here, Bloomberg reporter on the Trump beat, Kevin Cirilli. So, Kevin, one of the advantages you have, you see the guy every day. Yeah. Where do you think his head is at now in terms of, as his campaign expresses more confidence, his inner confidence that he can win or will win?
Well, you know, ever since that FBI reopening of the investigation, I've noticed a shift on the trail, not only in the crowds, but also in the candidate himself. You know, just when that broke, we were all over the country in the past 3 days. And you've definitely seen a new energy. It's definitely been a shift, quite frankly, since the last time I was here and all of those accusations from all those women had come out.
Katie, I get why we see Trump and Pence together in Pennsylvania today doing the Affordable Care Act event, because they really want to emphasize that message, and Pence has got some expertise there. But why are they together in Wisconsin as opposed to the norm of fanning out?
Well, what they needed to do in Philadelphia is find a way to get those suburban women to join Trump. And they felt like the best Republican ally they have right now is Governor Mike Pence. So who better to come out on stage and nail through these or hammer through these policy points? It is interesting that they are so laser focused right now on the Affordable Health Care Act. You know, Mark, you and I have been talking about how Donald Trump should have been hammering the WikiLeaks stuff a little bit more, but he kept straying from it. It seemed somebody finally got into his ear and is telling him to stay on these issues that will benefit him and potentially help him gain ground going through the election season or through the next week. But it is notable, Governor Pence was with him outside of Philadelphia. He's staying in Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania, frankly, much more so than Wisconsin, is a must-win state. If they don't get Pennsylvania, it's hard to see what the path to 270 is. And right now they are struggling, especially among suburban women in the suburbs of Philadelphia.
Yeah. The Trump campaign tells us that Scott Walker will be here tonight. Reince Priebus, both obviously from Wisconsin. Who's been out traveling with him lately? How are they doing at getting the kind of Republican politician support on the trail that Clinton gets all the time from the Democrats?
Well, you're seeing people like Rudy Giuliani, and you're seeing people like Bobby Knight as well, who was with him today as well as yesterday. But you're also seeing some of his closest campaign advisors, like Jared Kushner, as well as Stephen Miller, his senior policy advisor. I would say on the issue of the Obamacare and the Affordable Health Care Act, if you talk to senior advisors, they almost view this as a secret weapon of sorts and a closing argument, because if you go to those suburbs, if you go outside of Philadelphia, if you go to some of these other battleground states, Obamacare is incredibly unpopular, particularly as these new reports of increasing premiums come up. And so I think that is they're trying to showcase perhaps a more substantive side of Donald Trump as he makes his closing argument.
Katie, we're all sort of braced to see if any more stuff breaks. Do you feel like the Trump campaign is still in the mode of hoping there's additional WikiLeaks disclosures, additional stuff maybe from the FBI, or do you think they're comfortable with the hand they have now?
Well, I think they're happy with the hand they have now. I'm not sure if comfortable is the right word, and I'm not sure that you can say anybody knows if anything else is going to break in these next 7 days. Certainly the FBI revival of that investigation came as a surprise to absolutely everybody, including House Republicans and Senate Republicans, as well as the Clinton campaign itself. So comfortable is also not a word that I would use, but I would say that they are hopeful going forward, that if they're able to focus on this FBI revival and looking into the emails again, also focus on the premiums rising in Obamacare and its unpopularity among, the suburbs of Philadelphia, like Kevin was saying, but then also the rigged system and using the Donna Brazil's CNN, potentially giving questions to a CNN debate to Hillary Clinton, using that as a perfect example of their rigged system, a system being rigged in favor of Hillary Clinton over, say, someone like Bernie Sanders. They're able to not necessarily get more folks into their tent, but mostly make sure that Republicans out there who have been unsure of Donald Trump for the past 17 months come home to the Republican Party and vote the ticket all the way through. They need to find those moderates that they haven't been able to get, those that have been uncomfortable with Trump. And if they're able to say, hey, listen, Hillary Clinton is somebody, if she gets in office, could potentially face an indictment, they're hoping that that is going to convince those that are still the outliers to come in and say, you know what, I got to vote for Donald Trump. This is something that I need to do because I can't let Hillary Clinton get into office. That being said, it is a very high hurdle for him to overcome. Paul Ryan is not here in Wisconsin today. It's a pretty notable, with Donald Trump at least, a pretty notable snub. John Kasich the other day voted for John McCain, wrote him in on his ballot when he was voting in Ohio. So the gulf between Donald Trump and some more moderate Republicans, or some traditional Republicans, I should say, is still pretty vast, and it's something that not even disdain for Hillary Clinton can help bridge.
Katie Tur inside the event. We'll see you in there in a second. Kevin Cirilli here with me. Thank you both. We come back. Final words right after this.
right, you got to head over to BloombergPolitics.com right now and read all about how the campaigns of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are lawyering up for the possibility of election overtime. Tomorrow, Mark and I will both be on the road. I'm going to Utah. It's going to be fun. We got something coming up here on Bloomberg Technology. It's going to be a blockbuster week in tech earnings. We'll be talking about that shortly here on Bloomberg Television. Until tomorrow, from me here in New York and Mark up in Wisconsin, we say to you, sayonara.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. Donald Trump joined running mate Mike Pence in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania today and took aim at President Obama's signature legislative achievement, the Affordable Care Act.
I will ask Congress to convene a special session so we can repeal and replace. And it will be such an honor for me, for you, and for everybody in this country, because Obamacare has to be replaced.
In Dade City, Florida, Hillary Clinton was joined on the campaign trail by former Miss Universe Alicia Machado. Secretary Clinton reminded voters about the state's critical role in presidential politics.
Florida can decide who our next president is, which will affect the nation and the world.
Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi says it will take time to rebuild following Sunday's earthquake. He made his comments as he and his wife toured the affected region. South African President Jacob Zuma wants the country's high court to block a state watchdog report about allegations of undue government influence by a wealthy family. Critics have accused Zuma of presiding over a government tainted by corruption and political interference. From New York, I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg Technology is next.
I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, a busy Tuesday of tech earnings, and we're keeping score. First up, Electronic Arts boosting its outlook for the holiday quarter. Plus, Square with an upbeat revenue forecast. Details on how Jack Dorsey's other company performed in Q3. And a stronger yen and earthquake sink Sony. We'll break down the Japanese electronic giant's 86% profit nosedive. But first to our lead. Shares of Electronic Arts are higher in in after-hours trading after beating analyst estimates for the second quarter. It's the first of a handful of video game publishers reporting this week. Adjusted earnings fell 18% to 53 cents a share on revenue that also fell 4% to $1.1 billion. Investors are closely watching the guidance for the holiday quarter. EA raising its forecast, but still lower than some analysts had estimated. Joining us now to discuss, Wedbush analyst Michael Pachter in LA and our Bloomberg intelligence analyst Matt Kanterman in New York. Matt, I will start with you. What would you say are the high points here, especially that we're moving into the holiday quarter, the biggest quarter of the year for all game makers?
The key points here that EA continues to deliver on very strong results. The core franchise, the FIFA business, the Madden business, and the other sports games are performing very well, with FIFA engagement up significantly year on year versus the prior year launch. They have some new games coming out the holiday quarter, Battlefield 1 and Titanfall 2, which appear to be off to a good start. All in all, you know, the new games here are doing very well in the early stages, and it looks like this company is executing on its strategy well.
Now, you mentioned the new shooter games. EA is mostly, though, known for its sports titles. Michael, how do you expect the categories to stack up?
Sports is pretty stable. I mean, FIFA's been growing. Madden hasn't. Basketball has kind of faded into obscurity, and they're kind of every other year with golf. So, you know, overall, you're talking about really modest growth. But in the shooter category, as Matt said, they have two big games this quarter. They only had one last year, the Star Wars Battlefront game. So they should be up hundreds of millions of dollars year over year in that category. So it's a much bigger growth vehicle for them.
Now, Matt, last year at this time we were focused on the Star Wars Battlefield game. What's the big focus this year?
The big focus is definitely those new shooters and also their expansion into new platforms. Mobile gaming growth is a big opportunity for them. And you mentioned Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. It launched almost a year ago now, continues to be the driver of mobile growth. They launched a new FIFA mobile game. They have some new games coming in that area. And they've also done some new things with new platforms, new technologies such as virtual reality that are coming online this quarter.
Michael, you know, we talk a lot about the transformation of these companies in a digital world. Online purchases now making up 63% of the quarter. How well has EA really managed the transition, you know, to a digital world?
I think they're probably a bit better than anybody. I mean, the only company that compares to them in the West is Activision. And Activision, you know, purchased King, so that's about a third of their revenue. EA has been doing this mobile for 15 years. They're not particularly good at it, but they're positioned finally to thrive. They're as good as anybody in downloadable content, in in-game transactions, in full game digital downloads. So they've actually been pretty good in anticipating this shift, and they were ahead of the curve. It hurt them, you know, 5 years ago. The stock couldn't get out of its own way, but they just started to execute in the last 3 years, and the stock's been on fire.
Activision earnings are coming up later this week. Also, BlizzCon, their big gaming conference over the weekend. Michael, how are you expecting Activision to stack up to EA over the next 3 months?
You know, I think this is probably a down quarter for Activision. You have to comp last year's StarCraft expansion pack. That's tough. You have a Call of Duty game launching after these two big EA games, one of which is their highest rated game in 4 years. So Activision's got to compete against some pretty good games. I think that's tough for them. They will talk a lot about esports, which is becoming a big deal for them. They're actually selling franchises in case you have some, you know, an extra 10 or 12 million laying around and want to buy one. And I think next year is all about King advertising. They're going to run pre-roll ads in King free-to-play games like Candy Crush. So that's the big driver next year. But this quarter, probably EA outshines them.
And Matt, Zynga also coming up later this week. Of course, they were the hot kid on the block for a little while, and then sort of fell from grace. Are we going to continue to see more hits from Zynga over the next couple of years?
I think for Zynga, it's more about stabilization than growth right now. They need to stabilize the users they have. They need to get the new games that are coming online up to scale and start to offset the legacy business. And then we can start talking about growth. They did launch CSR Racing 2 recently. They have some more good games coming out. But really for them, it's all about stabilizing their active user base and offsetting the legacy business decline.
Michael, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they have stabilized, and their legacy business is really almost an afterthought now. They're on their third consecutive year of $700 million in revenue. Looks to me like they might come in at $740 or $750 million. So they're starting to grow again. It's really all about the fourth quarter launch, a game called Dawn of Titans. It's planned for holiday. We don't know what day that is. I assume that means Thanksgiving. That's going to be the game that gets the stock moving. If it works, stock's going up. If it doesn't work, I'm not sure the stock can get out of its own way.
All right, Wedbush analyst Michael Pachter and Bloomberg Intelligence analyst Matt Canterman, thank you both. We'll be on those later this week.
Thank you.
Staying with earnings, Etsy shares higher in after hours after it raised its full-year forecast for 2016, saying it expects product improvements and new seller services to boost sales over the holiday shopping season. Yet the company reported slowing growth in the value of the goods that move through the online marketplace. Coming up, Square's third quarter earnings just out as the company wraps its first year on the public markets. We'll break down all the numbers you need to know. And later, what is behind Sony's 86% profit nosedive? We will check in with our Tokyo team later this hour. This is Bloomberg. Tesla's balance sheet may get a boost from SolarCity. The electric car maker says its pending acquisition of the solar panel provider could add $1 billion to its cash balance in 3 years. Tesla CEO Elon Musk, who's chairman of SolarCity, has been making the case for a tie-up since the deal was approved by SolarCity's board back in August. The proposed deal has been widely criticized, with some critics calling the deal a poor use of Tesla's cash and a distraction from Tesla's car-making business. Well, Square popping and extended trading shares of the payments company up over 3% on better than expected third quarter earnings. The company forecasts revenue that may top analyst estimates off an increase in transactions from larger businesses. Square posted revenue of $439 million, up 32% from up $32 million from $332 million in the same period last year. And it posted a net loss of $32.3 million. The company also reporting it extended more than 35,000 business loans loans totaling $208 million from its Square Capital division. Joining me now, Chris Britt, a former Visa executive, now CEO of the mobile banking startup Chime. And from New York, Selena Wang, our Bloomberg tech reporter who covers Square. So, Selena, start out with the highlights here and what's happening in terms of payments volume, which is going up, but up a slower bump than we saw last quarter.
So there were very high expectations going into this quarter, given that they had a solid beat last quarter. And in order to move the shares, they really had to beat. So they did beat on all of their own guided metrics, on analyst estimates. They even raised forecasts. So you see the shares are up. Investors are reacting very positively to this. I think it's really a boost of confidence for investors in this company because they're really moving towards profitability. You saw the losses narrow. We're seeing higher adjusted EBITDA. So I think that was the biggest highlight. And their ancillary businesses are obviously becoming of increasing importance. Square Capital had an increase in loans. It doesn't look like they onboarded new investors, but it seems like they still have a lot of liquidity there. And as well as Caviar, they shared a few new data points that are positive, but still not full disclosure on that part of the business.
Chris, how would you rate the progress here, especially given that they're trying to bring on larger companies?
The progress is awesome. Over 50% year-over-year growth. They showed $12 million of EBITDA this quarter. And I think overall, this merchant acquiring business is a really attractive, it's a category. It's a large market. And companies in this market generate 40, 50% EBITDA margins. So there's no reason that they can't get to something to that level over time. And if you look at the landscape of the players that have tried to be in this category, Amazon, Intuit, PayPal, they're all out, right? So now it's Square against these traditional older companies that in many respects are more like, dinosaur, feet on the street sales organizations.
So are you referring to PayPal and First Data?
No, I'm talking about, I don't want to name the specific species of the dinosaur. But there are a lot of, the way that a small merchant today gets a terminal is they have an independent sales guy goes in there and sells them this big block and goes through an implementation process. Square is totally self-service, and it's an amazingly simple, beautiful product experience, and that's why people are taking it, and they're making huge progress on signing up more and more merchants.
How about the online lending business, Selena, and what's going on with Square Capital, given what we've seen with some of the other players in the market struggling, like Lending Club?
I do think that we need to separate what Square Capital is doing from what Lending Club does. So Square is offering these loans through its payments portal to businesses that qualify. So they're using machine learning and algorithms. They are seeing a lot of data from these merchants. They're seeing all of their payments data, their sales data. So they're only inviting people to apply for these loans if they know that they have the ability to pay it back. So we saw a 70% increase in loans that were given out, as well as they retained their low loss rate of just 4%. So this is very positive growth, and I think that investors who are very skeptical of this business are going to feel a lot more confidence.
Chris?
Yeah, $200 million of initiated merchant advances in this quarter. And they really do have a unique advantage versus other companies that play in this space specifically. So they would compete with someone like an OnDeck. OnDeck has to spend a lot of money to acquire these merchants to give loans to, or other small businesses. Square has an install base of almost 3 million merchants, and they see all their transaction data. So it really does give them an advantage in that category.
That said, we still have the dual role issue, and it seems like every quarter Twitter's having a tough quarter. Square actually has a good quarter. This is a $3.7 billion market cap company. Twitter, $12.5 billion. I was recently speaking with Steve Ballmer, former CEO of Microsoft, who has a very large stake in Twitter, and he said, look, I would love it if Jack decided to only run Twitter, and I'm sure Square investors feel the same way about Square. So, Chris, do you think that what he's doing is tenable over the longer term?
I think there's
how big do you think Square can become? Because sort of the idea is that, well, Twitter is bigger, Twitter is where his passion lies.
There's no question that Square investors would have been happy if the recent rumors were true about Twitter. But I saw Jack present at a conference last week in Las Vegas. He was super energized about Square. And I think, probably what's overlooked around Square, the executive team at Square is all-star. I mean, it's all the top, former Google, former Yahoo executives. So he has a huge bench. Would obviously be better if he was there more often. And in terms of the size, like I said, the merchant acquiring business is a great, great business with huge margins. I think they've got a long way to grow.
So if the market cap is $3.7 billion,
they've got a lot of
double that, triple that. Like, how big can this company?
Yeah, I think it could get much higher. They could easily be generating hundreds of millions of dollars of EBITDA just from the acquiring business. And I think those other things like Square Capital, Caviar, to some extent, that's just noise, right? That's option value that could result in the company being worth even more over time. But I think that core merchant business in and of itself is an extremely attractive asset.
Quickly, Selena, we've reported that Square had tried to sell Caviar at one point, but Jack just made some comments on the earnings call that is very much still a part of their future. What's your read on what's actually happening with Caviar?
So I think that there has been some growth. They gave this 11 times more order volume since they first acquired in 2014, but that's to be expected since they've been investing so much money into this business. They've hired hundreds of employees when it started out as a very small business. I think we need to remember here that they recently pulled out of 3 markets, and I've spoken to a lot of people on background who said that there were only a small handful of order volumes from some of those small places. So clearly they're just focusing on a few markets where they think they can gain a substantial share, pulling out of a lot of other areas where their competitors are still thriving. So this is still a niche business, and I think it's still unclear just how successful Caviar can become.
All right, Selena Wang, our Bloomberg Tech reporter who covers Square, and Chris Britt, CEO of Chime. Thank you, as always.
Thanks a lot
for joining us. Coming up, we'll hear from a CEO betting that the Internet of Things will lead the way to a 4th IT revolution. And a reminder, all episodes of Bloomberg Tech are streaming live on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 6 p.m. in New York, 3 p.m. here in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Programming note, tune into Bloomberg Television in prime time for the latest episode of The David Rubenstein Show, Peer-to-Peer Conversations, Wednesday night, 8 p.m. in New York. This week's guest, Berkshire Hathaway CEO Warren Buffett. Take a listen.
We were having roughly 2% or less lower growth in the last couple of years. Do you think that it's possible to ever grow 3 and 4 and 5% again in this economy?
There will be some years, but 2% growth, if you have a little less than 1% population growth, means in one generation, 25 years call it, that we will add maybe $18,000 or $19,000 of GDP per capita. Family of four, right. 75,000. So we're just beginning.
Renowned financier and philanthropist David Rubenstein travels the country talking to leaders to uncover their stories and their path to success. Catch the third part of this 6-part series and the full interview Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. Competition to reign over the Internet of Things is heating up. And one company looking to make its mark is C3 IoT, formerly C3 Energy, which recently closed a $70 million funding round led by TPG. Their aim to connect manufacturing equipment, medical devices, and all the other commercial equipment used by the world's largest companies. Funding for IoT companies peaked last year, hitting a whopping $3.2 billion, double what it was in 2012. But the numbers are expected to decrease to $3 billion this year, according to CB Insights. Joining me now to discuss the IoT landscape is C3 IoT founder and CEO Tom Siebel, who founded the software company Siebel Systems back in the day and worked at Oracle a long time before that, and a general legend in the industry. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So how do you, as someone who has seen many technological shifts, how do you respond to this idea that the hype around IoT is dissipating and that some of it is just hype?
Well, I've been in the information technology business now for 4 decades. So I've seen the transition from mainframe computing to mini computing to personal computing to internet computing to cloud computing, and each of these was an entire replacement market. Well, it is clear, I think, that the next generation of computing is all about smart connected devices or the Internet of Things. And I think this is an entire replacement market for everything that's happening in enterprise software, just like all of the others prove to be replacement markets.
What are the limits of IoT? I mean, we hear everything from there'll be chips in our bodies, chips in our food, chips in our clothes. Where won't there be chips?
Well, I think all of that is correct. At the beginning of this century, there might have been 500,000 sensors out there. Today, there are 39 billion. In 5 years, there'll be 50 billion. In 10 years, each of us will have embedded in our bodies or be wearing perhaps 10 sensors. But all the value chains are being censored. Healthcare, financial services, telecommunications, transportation, the energy industry, you name it.
You're taking on companies as big as GE, as well as a host of small startups, big companies like Microsoft backing, some of these upstarts. What do you have on them?
Well, when we started Oracle, we took on all the big software companies, and we did pretty well. When we built Siebel, we took on all the large software companies, Oracle, SAP, and IBM, and we did pretty well. And in each of those markets, we established and maintained a market leadership position globally. We have about 100 million sensors under management today, which is 100 million more than anybody else in the market. So far, we're doing pretty well.
What about the security issues, the cyber attack issues, and the fact that, for every chip means another potential vulnerability?
Well, I think, first of all, this is a critically important issue to which we do not pay enough attention. Okay, and you look at the threat that critical infrastructure is under. Now, there is a myth, however, that somehow data are more secure behind our own firewall than they are in cyberspace. And I would argue that the opposite is true. See, NSA for details. See, Department of State for details.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the data used to be secure in our own data rooms when it took, a forklift to move a storage device. It no longer takes a forklift. But I would suggest the only opportunity where we can really secure data, using encryption and avoiding penetration, is in cyberspace. I think this is the place where we can secure it.
I'm curious for your thoughts on the election, given I know that you've made big political contributions in the past, from what I can tell, mostly to independents, but some to Republicans. What do you think of the current election, having seen many elections and the impact of many presidents on Silicon Valley?
I think this is a very sad state of affairs. I think that the United States is in perhaps, it's just a shame. And I think we should be ashamed for ourselves. And it's very sad, it's very scary, and it's very concerning.
Have you chosen a side? If so, will you share?
I think that, I think I have really no comment on what's going on, but it's hard to see a good outcome.
What do you think a Hillary Clinton or a Donald Trump presidency, how do you see it impacting innovation in Silicon Valley in particular?
I think in Silicon Valley is unstoppable. Okay, so I think that government can get in the way of creativity and innovation. I think that no matter what they do, it won't stop. It is accelerating. It's accelerating at a very rapid rate, and it's very exciting.
All right, Tom Siebel, C3 IoT. We'll keep our eye on you guys. Thank you so much for stopping by. Still to come, there has never been a U.S. presidential election with as much big data analysis as we've seen this year. So what kind of impact is it having a week before the election? We will discuss. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on Bloomberg Radio, the app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. For the first time in more than 2 years, Iraqi troops are in Mosul. That's according to the Associated Press, which says the U.S.-led coalition forces also recaptured the state television building despite fierce resistance from Islamic State fighters. House-to-house fighting could last for months. Choi Soon-sil, who's accused of acting as South Korea's so-called shadow president, has been jailed under emergency detention laws. That's according to the Washington Post, which reports prosecutors want to know how much influence she's had over President Park Geun-hye, her friend of more than 40 years. Choi is suspected of amassing an illicit fortune because of her close ties to President Park. Fox News cites unidentified U.S. officials who say a North Korean ballistic missile launch could take place in the next 24 to 72 hours. It would be the 9th such launch by Pyongyang this year. Colombian President and Nobel Peace Laureate Juan Manuel Santos received a ceremonial military welcome in Britain. President Santos was greeted by Queen Elizabeth and her husband Prince Philip in London. The 3-day state visit is the first to Britain by a Colombian leader. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 6:30 p.m. Tuesday here in New York, 9:30 Wednesday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Let's start off in New Zealand, trading for 90 minutes now on Wednesday and already off 0.5%. That's just after the country posted its best jobless figures in about 8 years. Shares in Fonterra Fund are bucking the trend, though. They're up 1/3%, and this is after we saw whole milk prices surge almost 20% in an overnight auction to $3,317 per tonne. That is the highest level since July 2014. Take a look at ASX futures. They're off about 0.6%, and we'll be keeping an eye on Virgin Australia shares at the open after the airline announced a first quarter loss. To complete the set, Nikkei futures also pointing down. The market in Japan will have its first chance to react to Sony's second quarter earnings. A surprise net profit there of $48 million. Analysts had expected a loss, but that number's still down 86%. Sony hit by costs involved in the sale of its battery business and, of course, the strong yen. On the subject of the yen, that slipped to a 3-year low after the Bank of Japan maintained stimulus and pushed out the target for reaching its inflation goal to 2018. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology coming up next.
Technology. I'm Emily Chang. With 1 week to go before Election Day in the U.S., we are focused on what big data analysis can tell us about voter sentiment at this moment. CrowdPack is an independent, nonpartisan political data startup whose mission is to make it easier for voters to learn about who's running for office. You can log on, take a quiz, get information about which candidates share your views. All of the data is based on public information from fundraising disclosures to voting records. CrowdPack CEO Steve Hilton joins us now with the company's latest research coming in just days to go now before Election Day, Steve. Number one, you've been looking into where did the Tea Party go? So where did they go? Did they all just fold into Trump supporters?
Well, in the short answer, yes, Emily. It's great to be with you. I'm surprised people aren't sick of hearing about the election, but I'll try and make it interesting for our viewers. There's a really interesting thing that's happened in relation to the people who used to support, on the Republican side, those really aggressive challengers to establishment, Republicans like Paul Ryan and so on. They seem to have been flocked to Trump. So there's a way of describing it which says that the Tea Party has become the Trump Party. The other thing that's happened on the other side is that you've seen a lot of consolidation behind Hillary Clinton, where a lot of the holdouts, if you like, the Bernie Sanders supporters who really couldn't bring themselves to get behind her, they finally do seem to be coming her way in terms of at least their donations, if not necessarily in all their opinions about what she might do as president. So there are some interesting changes, but I think actually the kind of data that we're providing now for our users, where it's going to be most useful is probably not at the presidential level, but lower down the ballot, where people really haven't got any idea about who the candidates are for state legislature and so on. Those really important positions that affect education and healthcare and transportation and really big parts of people's lives. And yet candidates often get on the ballot without anyone really understanding where they're coming from. And we think that our data, which looks at who's giving them money, gives our users a really good guide as to where the candidates stand and who might be closest to their view.
You found, as you mentioned, that Clinton has finally consolidated Democrats, but it's really happened, in the last few weeks. You also found that she's vastly outraised Trump in every industry except for agriculture. Tell us about the trends you saw.
Well, it's just that, I mean, to be honest, he hasn't put that much effort into fundraising. He's, if you like, pioneering a new approach to election campaigns, which is you don't go out there and try and raise as much money as possible. And it's interesting that the Republican candidate is just not getting the support of business right across the board, apart from that one sector, as you described. And I think of particular interest to our audience, the tech sector is almost completely united behind Clinton. Obviously, Peter Thiel has been a high-profile exception to that. But generally speaking, technology, like other industries, getting behind Clinton.
And what about smaller donors in general? How have both of the candidates handled them?
Well, Trump's actually done, more recently, he's actually done really well with small donors. He's actually made a bit more of an effort. That seems to have happened over the summer. Clinton has certainly diversified her base somewhat, but she's still very reliant on some of those big donors, and actually Trump is the one that seems to, in the more recent period, to have done better at mobilizing small donors. So I still think that, frankly, at the presidential level, there is still far too much influence of the big check writers, the big donors, and we've got a long way to go, I think, before we get that true democratization of political fundraising, which is one of the reasons we started CrowdPack.
In the last week before an election, what benefit can fundraising have? I know there's last-minute fundraising going on. What impact does it really have?
Well, I think that there's two really important things to bear in mind. First of all, at this late stage, one of the most familiar things that campaigns do, which is spend money on ads that people in certain parts of the country get absolutely sick of because they can barely turn on the TV without seeing a political ad. That doesn't really deliver you much benefit at this late stage because you can barely even buy the inventory to have an impact. But the really crucial point is actually the way the political system works. Because of the electoral college, the fact that the election is decided state by state, the fact is that if you live in one of the many states in America which are basically solidly Democratic or solidly Republican, your vote is really unlikely to shape the outcome of the election. That's why we hear so much about all the battleground states. Now, one thing that's really interesting that's happened just recently, in the last few days actually, is someone's created a crowdfunding campaign on CrowdPack to raise money to give people rides to the polls in those battleground states. So they're teaming up with Lyft so that if you donate money on crowdpack.com to this particular crowdfunding campaign, which is right on our homepage right now, then even if you live somewhere like California, if you're watching this in California or New York, one of those solid Democratic states, frankly, looking for something to do to try and support Hillary Clinton, this is one of the most useful, practical things you can do to actually give money so that people who live in the battleground states where the election is going to be decided can be helped to actually get that very practical help to get to the polls and vote on Election Day.
Good to hear that you guys are doing that. Now, sites like CrowdPack didn't really exist in the last election. I mean, your goal is to educate voters and make sure they have more information than ever before. Do you see evidence that it's working, that voters are more educated than they were 4 years ago?
I don't know. I think that's definitely a really big part of our mission. We want people to participate in politics at every level. We're trying to build tools that help them to run for office, especially at the local level where we want people to engage and also to be better informed when it comes to vote and, as we've just discussed, to raise money so we don't have the political system that's so dependent on big donors. I think there still is a real problem, though, with the fact that so many people are just not interested and really turned off, especially in this election season, where the candidates at the top of the ticket, both of them in their different ways, have proved so unattractive. I still think we've got a long way to go. And then for us at CrowdPack, actually, we think that focusing on the local aspect of politics is probably the best place to start, because there people can feel if they run for office in their local community, they really can make a difference. And you can see the difference you make if you run for school board or your local council. And there's less cynicism, less partisan bickering. We think that local politics may be the best place to get people engaged.
Last quick question, Steve, on the presidential election. You know, there are concerns that polling might not necessarily be representative of the actual results. We saw this, of course, with Brexit, you know, which I know you're very familiar with. What are the chances that, and Hillary's leading in the polls, yet the polls are tightening. What are the chances that that this election turns out, that the results turn out to be different from what we believe them to be?
Honestly, I think there's a really high chance of that. And I think it speaks to one of the big similarities between what's going on in this election and with Brexit, which is that you've got a huge group of people here in America, as you had in the UK, who for many years have felt that no one's really listening to them. Their incomes have fallen. They're losing their jobs. They feel really let down by whoever's been in power, whether that's Labour or Conservative in the UK or Republicans or Democrats here. And so their attitude is, look, what difference does it make? We've given up on politics. They haven't voted for many years. Now, those are the people that actually with Brexit thought, you know what, here's a one-off chance to really make a statement and get a big change. And they're seeing the same sort of thing with Trump. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of people out there who are secret Trump supporters who've given up on politics, think he might be the kind of disruptive shake-up that the system needs, but are afraid to say so because of all the attacks on Trump that they see all over the place, particularly in the media.
And I'm expecting the next few days will be very eventful. Something will happen. CrowdPack CEO Steve Hilton, thank you, as always, for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Up next, Sony earnings disappoint as profits plunge nearly 86%. We'll discuss what's behind the numbers next. This is Bloomberg. On today's tech funding board, India's largest ride-hailing startup, Ola, is in talks to raise about $600 million. This according to a person familiar with the matter who says that would give the company enough capital for at least 18 months. Current Ola investor SoftBank is said to be planning to participate in the round. Bloomberg's managing editor of Asia tech coverage, Peter Elstrom, joins us now from Tokyo with more. So, Peter, Uber has said India is now its priority after moving on from China. Can Ola fend off Uber?
Right. Well, that's the big question here. Yeah, Uber, after exiting China, has to prove that it can succeed in some of these big international markets. India is at the top of that list. It's also expanding into Latin America and Southeast Asia. But India is very, very important. For a while, it looked like Ola was going to be a bit vulnerable because it didn't have the kind of capital that it needed to fight back by subsidizing drivers and customers. But now, if it is able to complete this fundraising for $600 million, it's going to give Ola a lot more firepower to fight back and defend its turf against Uber.
All right, let's talk about Sony. Sony's profit falling off a cliff this quarter. The company posting earnings that plunged 86% from a year ago. What happened?
Well, there were a couple of special charges in there that led to the decline in the net income line. They're selling their battery business. They're taking a charge because of that. They also had to go through the Kumamoto earthquake, and they took a charge because of that as well. Probably more concerning than the sharp decline in net income because of the special one-time items. You're seeing a stronger yen that is putting some pressure on their operations, particularly on the camera sensor business that has been very successful for them historically, and also a bit in the games business and the smartphone business. So that's going to be an issue to watch over the long term.
Can the new products that are coming over the holiday quarter, the push into virtual reality, do you see that providing upside to expectations?
Well, I think in terms of financial impact is probably going to be limited for the next quarter or so. It's still a relatively small business, but there is this land grab right now for virtual reality headsets, and Sony wants to be at the forefront of that. They've come out with a headset that's priced a bit lower than some of the competition out there, and they have their PlayStation business with an established base that they want to be able to capitalize on as they sell these headsets. So I think what investors are going to look for is more the potential of that business going forward rather than specific financial impact.
All right, moving on to Alibaba, Peter, which also reports results before the start of U.S. trading on Wednesday. What are you expecting, Peter? This is a company that said they're trying to bring investors more transparency. Jack Ma wrote a letter to shareholders a few weeks ago that sort of rattled investors, talking about how Alibaba needs to make a transition. You know, it's competing with every e-commerce company now, and they need to distinguish themselves beyond that.
That's right. Alibaba for a long time has pushed hard to move beyond the traditional Chinese e-commerce business that they have. Sometimes that makes people nervous because they're moving into territories that they don't know quite as well. Now they've bought a company in Southeast Asia that does e-commerce. That's one of the potential expansion areas for them. And also they're moving pretty aggressively into the cloud business, following Amazon's lead and using the servers that they already have to be able to deliver cloud services. So far that's been pretty successful within China. Now they're trying to move those services outside of China and offer them to other customers too. This quarter will give us some insights into whether that high margin business is succeeding.
What about the health of the Chinese consumer? I sat down with Alibaba President Mike Evans a couple of weeks ago and asked, you know, look, from the outside you see GDP growth slowing, you see greater concerns about the flatness of the Chinese economy. It may never grow as fast as it once did, and yet you have companies like Alibaba saying, but the Chinese consumer is still healthy and still spending money. You know, what are we actually seeing on the ground there, and how are those two things not at odds?
Well, Alibaba has certainly been able to capitalize on that over its history, and we'll get more insights into that this quarter. The Chinese economy is still growing fairly steadily, even though the growth is slowing down a bit. Alibaba's benefiting from that, this expanding middle class within China, and also the shift to online commerce in particular. We'll have November 11th, Singles Day, coming up. That will give us a lot of insights into exactly how excited consumers are about some of the things that Alibaba is offering on its system. But Alibaba has become a proxy for the Chinese consumer in a lot of ways. It would like to move beyond that and have a more diversified business if it can.
Singles Day is coming up on 11/11. This is their big shopping day of the year. Do you think it's going to be a one-off, or you know, is it really an important boost to earnings for the quarter?
Well, it's one data point. Alibaba has certainly done a great job of marketing, and it's become a little bit like Black Friday in the U.S. It will again become a big media event, but it's only going to be one data point. You need to see whether that growth can be sustainable over longer periods of time, and whether they're able to expand beyond China and capitalize on some of these opportunities outside of the country.
All right. Our Bloomberg Asia Tech Managing Editor, Peter Elstrom, joining us from Tokyo. Peter, thanks so much for the roundup. Mubadala Development has joined the list of investors looking to get a stake in SoftBank's multi-billion-dollar technology fund. This according to people familiar with the matter, who say the Abu Dhabi investor is holding talks with the Japanese telecoms and internet giants and plans to incorporate money and sovereign investments into the potential $100 billion fund. SoftBank is also in talks with European and North American investors. If the $100 billion fundraising target is met, the fund becomes the biggest private equity fund in tech. Coming up, Facebook reports earnings Wednesday after the bell. We'll tell you what you should be watching for next. This is Bloomberg. Instagram is launching new shopping tools designed not to interfere with a user's browsing experience. The photo sharing app will begin allowing 20 select brands to tag products in their photos, which navigates users to the retailer's websites. This is Instagram's first foray into a broader retail monetization strategy after several failed e-commerce venture attempts by its parent company, Facebook. And speaking of Facebook, it's set to report earnings Wednesday after the bell. CEO Mark Zuckerberg says he wants Facebook to be a video-first company as video helps to fuel growth in mobile advertising. Bloomberg's Scarlet Fu has the breakdown in this edition of Numbers Don't Lie.
Facebook Nation is huge, as you can see from the user breakdown over the last 3 years. You've got daily active users, which is the yellow bars, mobile monthly active users, the orange bars, and then total monthly active users, which are the blue bars, which amounts to 1.7 million at last count. Billion with a B. Mobile users are critical, of course, since Facebook gets 84% of its advertising revenue from handheld devices. Now, the company has morphed from the world's biggest social network to the owner of popular mobile apps ranging from Facebook to WhatsApp, Messenger to Instagram. Each of these has more than 1 billion users, except for Instagram, which has 500 million. Facebook is capitalizing on all of these eyeballs. Its average revenue per user rose almost 36% in the second quarter to $3.82. Now, the metric for North America jumped almost 54%, while Europe grew 38%. Facebook, however, not immune from controversy. Last month, you'll recall that the company said it overestimated the average viewing time for video ads over the past 2 years. And this matters because big brands are pouring ad dollars online, with almost half of all spending being directed to Google and Facebook alone. Now, one specific area that's attracting money is Instagram. Facebook's photo sharing app is expected to see a surge in ad revenue over the next few years. Another potential revenue driver is WhatsApp. The number of people using messaging services globally, which is this chart right here, may top 2 billion in 2018. Now, Facebook has yet to really monetize its different messaging platforms, but if it is able to crack the code on them, it stands to garner the largest share of messaging revenue around the world. These distinct apps and potential streams of money allow Facebook to ramp up its investment in more futuristic initiatives, such as virtual reality and connecting the world to the internet.
That was Bloomberg's Scarlet Fu. Now, for today's edition of Out of This World, in what could be called the ultimate absentee ballot, NASA astronaut Kate Rubins cast her vote aboard the International Space Station. Rubins used an electronic method to send her completed ballot back to Earth before leaving the station. No mention of who she voted for. Astronauts are able to vote this way thanks to a 1997 bill passed in Texas, which allows space explorers to vote while in orbit. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Tech. Tomorrow, another big day of tech earnings with Alibaba out before the bell, Facebook, Fitbit, Activision, and Zynga following after the close. Remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Tech are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 6 p.m. in New York, 3 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.
City. This is Charlie Rose.
FBI Director James Comey announced Friday in a letter to Congress that new emails had surfaced pertinent to the investigation into Hillary Clinton's private server. The emails were discovered through a separate FBI investigation into former Congressman Anthony Weiner. In a letter to his FBI staff Friday afternoon, Comey explains his decision, saying, quote, "It would be misleading to the American people were we not to supplement the record." Major political fallout unfolded over the weekend as Hillary Clinton called Comey's move unprecedented and deeply troubling. Her campaign called on the FBI director to release all details of their investigation. At a campaign rally Friday, Trump described the email scandal as bigger than Watergate. Authorities obtained a warrant on Sunday to search the emails of Huma Abedin, longtime Clinton aide and the estranged wife of Anthony Weiner. Several Justice Department officials have criticized Comey, including former Attorney Generals Eric Holder and Michael McCarthy. The news broke with only a week now remaining until the election. Joining me now from Washington, Michael Isikoff. He's the chief investigative correspondent for Yahoo News. From Washington, Michael Schmidt of the New York Times. In a studio here with me, Jonathan Karl, chief White House correspondent for ABC News. Michael Schmidt, where is this now, and what is likely to happen next?
This review is getting off the ground, and the FBI is basically taking the messages, the emails, and putting them into a program that will allow them to go through them and see, are there duplicates here? Are these emails that we've seen before? Is there classified information here? It's not a manpower issue. It's an issue of getting the messages in a computer that allows the agents to actually take a look at them and see what's really there and get under the hood.
So once they get under the hood, how long should it take them?
Well, that's the question. Over the weekend, the FBI folks I was talking to said, at the least, this is going to take a few weeks. Last night, they were saying maybe we can get this done by Election Day. The pressure on them is immense, and I think the Justice Department is pushing them as well, and they're going to try and move heaven and earth to get this done in the next week.
So is it fair to say, and this is for all of you, that everybody wants this done before election, that everybody wants that? Am I right or wrong?
I'm not so sure of that. I mean, unless they can definitively say that every single one of these emails has already been accounted for and they are exact duplicates of what they have already seen, I'm not sure they're going to say anything. And I'm not even sure they would say that, because at this point, anything they say about the substance of this matter could be construed as commenting on and affecting the election. And I think that they've been taking such withering criticism over that at this point that probably the best thing they can do is just shut up until after the election.
But there's so much ambiguity here. I mean, you have the whole election, is in part predicated on what the answer to this question is. This may be absolutely nothing. These may be entirely duplicates of what they already have.
Which is what the Clinton campaign says.
In fact, I think it's a reasonably good chance that that's exactly what's going on. And to have this kind of cloud hanging over there, over the entire campaign, only to get answered a couple weeks after the election, say, oh, guess what, it was nothing, seems to me highly problematic. There's a lot of pressure on Comey. Whether or not it's doable, I think Michael raises a good question, is another question. But there is an obligation to try to at least answer, is this a big deal or is it not a big deal?
And how do they answer that?
Well, they have to go through, and you can, one way to answer it is if it turns out this is simply a situation where duplicate emails, where maybe Huma Abedin accessed her emails on this computer, or maybe they came off the cloud. This is the same basket of emails that she's already turned over. Then okay, the FBI's already been through it.
You're a political reporter. Is it hurting her?
It is unquestionably hurting her right now, because it has given motivation to Republicans at a time when the Trump campaign was flagging, when Republicans were demoralized and thinking that they were facing defeat.
They say they were already inching closer, that the numbers were between separating her and him were closing.
The polls were certainly closing. Whether they were closing fast enough is doubtful.
To closing.
This helped accelerate that closing. The reason why they're closing is Trump has gone over a week without a major scandal affecting his campaign.
It is certainly possible and maybe likely that most of these emails are duplicates of ones they've seen before. But all it takes is for, several or even one, if it's that they haven't seen before, there's a process they have to go through. Does it contain classified information?
But Michael, remember, the bar is higher than that. When Comey decided not to prosecute, he said that for this to be prosecutable, there would have to be either obstruction of justice or willful and intentional mishandling of classified information. So she's already been found to have had classified information on her server.
Even if there are dozens of new classified emails, it's not going to change much because we know there's over 100 from his announcement over the summer. The interesting thing is, if you're Comey, is you probably want to wait till after the election if there's nothing here. Imagine if Comey came out on Friday and said, hey, we looked at these and there's nothing here. He would get criticized even worse than he's getting now because people would say, you created this whole hubbub for nothing. So if you're Comey, I think you wanted this to play out over some time and then be able to come back next month or so when the pressure has come away from the campaign.
But Michael Schmidt, suppose he finds something that's very pregnant.
Well, we are certainly not going to know that before the election, because a potential crime here would be why this might possibly be pertinent is if these emails were withheld for some reason. If he finds out that there is classified information and it is sensitive, he wants to know why wasn't this turned over. Huma Abedin was supposed to produce all her emails to the FBI in the course of this investigation. Why weren't these? Was she hiding them? That's a whole separate exercise. There's no evidence of that at this point, but I'm saying if they find there is something in these emails that is classified they haven't seen before, there's an exercise they have to go through, and it's likely to play out over some period of time.
Is the criticism of the FBI director fair or unfair?
I think it's fair in the sense that this was highly unusual, if not unprecedented. He made a decision to affirmatively say something about an investigative matter after being advised by the Justice Department not to do that. That's something that any FBI director would be criticized for doing. So, he should have anticipated that much more than I think he did. I know there was a lot of discussions within the FBI about how to play this out, and they did take seriously all the implications. But I don't think they had somebody at the table who was quite advising him just what a furor this was going to cause.
But here is an interesting situation where he was criticized in part for what he said the first time he went. He made a statement, and then when he went before Congress, he was criticized at that time by Donald Trump, and now he's being criticized by the Hillary Clinton camp. I mean, he'd be damned if he does and be damned if he doesn't.
And the Clinton campaign has made a decision here to do what they did to Ken Starr back in the 1990s, to vilify the prosecutor and to make him the issue. They did it very effectively with Ken Starr. But in this case, you were talking about the FBI director. True, he served under President Bush. He was a registered Republican. But nobody thinks that he is a shill for Donald Trump. And you have right now Democratic partisans like Harry Reid basically accusing him of using his office to try to get Trump elected president. I think it's an odd strategy when you consider that he is serving a 10-year term. He is a guy that is seen, you can criticize this might have been a clumsy move, might not have been the way to go, but he is not somebody who is trying to tip the scales in this election. And right now, that's the way they're portraying him. And like I said, it's a 10-year term. Unless President Hillary Clinton decided to fire him, he will be her FBI director.
Michael.
Comey saw this as the lesser of two evils. He said, I'm going to get really criticized here no matter what I do, but I can live with the criticisms of my judgment for doing this now. But I don't think but what he said is I couldn't live with the criticisms that I suppressed information before the election. I think he thought the history books would be much harsher on him and harsher on the FBI if that were to come out, and that was too big of a risk for him.
So what happens if he discovers something that's damaging to her? Maybe an email that was deleted, that shouldn't have been deleted, whatever it might be. that was classified, and they said they were not classified. Any of that.
We're in incredibly uncharted territory here. So who really knows what's going to happen in the next week? He could come out and give an update on it in a few days. He may feel the pressure to do that. So, you know, to try and predict it is very unusual, because no one thought that this would come back. This email thing was done. It was closed in July. It was over, and now it's back going again.
I think that Jonathan made a good point about just looking past the election, assuming Hillary Clinton wins. Yeah, James Comey is going to be her FBI director, and just imagine what kind of relationship that's going to be. It was already almost certainly going to be tense because of the original comments that he made in July, calling her actions extremely careless, which many people in the Clinton camp and elsewhere criticized. So, you know, now doubly to imagine that they're going to have to work together. It is, by the way, a parallel to go back to the first Clinton administration. Bill Clinton and Louis Freeh were not even on speaking terms. Louis Freeh wouldn't go to the White House. And the idea that in a new Clinton administration, once again, the White House is going to be in a feud or war or battle with the FBI is not a healthy situation.
I think Comey wants the FBI to have this reputation where we follow the facts, we don't care about politics. So if he's seen one day as going after the Republicans and another day going after the Democrats, then that sort of plays into that narrative that they don't care. We're just going to do what we think is right and follow the evidence.
Yeah. Of course, the Justice Department saying, well, you're not following procedure. You know, we had well-established rules for this, yeah.
There's also some questions here that Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, has to answer. You know, her people advised Comey not to send that letter, saying it violated longstanding policy. She could have ordered him not to send it, and she chose not to because I think we can assume she didn't want to face the potential political criticism of concealing, of blocking the FBI from taking investigative steps that might relate to the Clinton investigation. So in some ways, she went through the same sort of calculus that Comey did. Now, Comey did an affirmative step to make something public, so it's not quite the same, but I think the fact that they both had this kind of political calculus, what am I going to be attacked for if I do something, is worth noting here. And it may affect Hillary Clinton's decision about whether she wants to keep Loretta Lynch on as Attorney General or not.
Does Huma Abedin know what's on that computer?
We don't know.
I don't think so. I don't think so because, well, if you know, she was asked to turn over all of her electronics, all of the, you know, stuff that could have classified information on it. And by all accounts, it looks like, you know, everyone did turn over the things that they had to. And what we had heard from, you know, people that we talked to that have been briefed on the investigation is that she has no clue how these emails ended up on the laptop.
Well, how did they?
Well, we do know from her interview with the FBI in April that she said at one point she routinely forwarded State Department emails and documents to both her Clinton email account and her personal Yahoo account so she could more easily print them. And at one point, the agents actually confronted her with a email that had a attachment of a Pakistani policy paper written by an aide to Richard Holbrooke that was on her personal Yahoo account, and asked how did it get there, and that's when she gave that explanation that she forwarded them. So I think it's likely that this laptop of her husband's had either her personal Yahoo account and or her Clinton email account on it, and that's how they got there. And by the way, that 302 is an indication that this could well have the kind of substantive and possibly sensitive state policy documents and emails on it. Now, whether or not they were turned over as part of some other production is what we don't know at this point.
My question about that, did she say it was policy documents, or did she simply say it was like State Department pronouncements?
Well, actually, in her Judicial Watch civil deposition, she said she forwarded State Department press clips to her Yahoo account. That's what she said in the civil deposition. But if you read the FBI 302, which I did over the weekend, there she is confronted with this policy paper, a Pakistani policy paper on it. And she said this is the sort of material she routinely forwarded to that Yahoo account. So there is a discrepancy between what she said in the civil deposition and what she told the FBI in April.
I assume they would not be classified, would they?
I think some of them could be classified. Yeah.
So she was sending stuff over to that computer that was classified.
Well, we know that there were classified emails that were being circulated between Hillary Clinton and our senior staffers, including Huma Abedin. So it is entirely possible that some of these would be considered
just to raise
at least
one last
confidential.
Point. All help me understand. What she was supposed to, what Hillary Clinton supposedly deleted from her server, some 30,000 emails, they were all supposed to be personal and in no way official, right?
Yeah, although the FBI was able to recover many of those emails, and Comey in his congressional testimony said that there were official State Department emails that were deleted as part of that. Now the Clinton team said it was active. They said they didn't go through each one. They did this through an algorithm, and there may have been some mistakes made.
So Harry Reid raised the question of whether FBI is sitting on evidence of some link between the Trump himself or the Trump campaign and Vladimir Putin and the Russian intelligence operations. Do you know anything about that?
Well, what Reid is saying, well, okay, Comey, so you go out and you notify and make this thing public about the emails, but there's this other thing going on with Trump and you're not talking about it. Why is it that you're talking about one and not talking about the other? Now, what Comey, what the FBI would say is basically, Comey made this pledge to Congress to be as transparent as possible in the aftermath of the investigation. And he basically would say that he made this pledge and he has to update Congress because he told them the investigation was completed and closed.
And we haven't had any really good polls that indicate what impact it's having, have we, or not?
We have our ABC News tracking poll, which is over 4 days. We now have 2 days of polling data that are post-Comey. And what it shows is further tightening of the race. We're now at 1 point lead nationally. Now, it's a national poll. Of course, this will be fought in the battleground states. There's no polling yet in the battleground states post-Comey. But our poll shows that Republicans are now more energized, more likely to vote, and as a result, it has come to a 1 point race nationally.
I'm repeating myself now, but both Michaels in Washington. Do you believe Comey will say something before the election?
I thought he might, just to explain it. That was a couple days ago. The latest I'm hearing is, is no. But I think he's taking it day by day. He's certainly hearing all the criticism he's getting, and that's got to sting. I mean, some of the critics are people who he respects, has worked with. Larry Thompson, who was his predecessor as Deputy Attorney General, signed that op-ed with Jamie Gorelick, taking him to task over this. That is not easy for him. So I don't know. At some point, he will want to explain himself.
Before the election, Michael Schmidt?
I'd be surprised. I think the FBI's hope is that they can just get through this stuff and get through the election without any more headlines coming out of it. But to Mike's point, there's this Eric Holder op-ed in the Washington Post today, which is extremely critical of Comey. And that, Holder was the Attorney General when Comey started out as the FBI director. Now, they clashed a lot, but at the same time, to have the Attorney General that, you worked for, taking you to task publicly, that's got to have an impact on him.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Neil Shen is here. He's one of China's most successful investors. In 2005, he founded Sequoia Capital China. Its portfolio includes nearly all of that country's largest venture-backed companies. The firm has also been instrumental in bringing American companies to the Chinese market. These include LinkedIn, Airbnb, and WME IMG. Last week, ZTO Express, a Sequoia-backed Chinese logistics company, became the largest U.S. public offering of 2016. I am pleased to have Neil Shen at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Tell me where you think the Chinese economy is at this moment.
I think, if you look at the last 10 years, the GDP growth clearly has come down. Right. But I would say the quality of the growth has improved. If you're looking at the consumer economy, their weight in overall GDP has moved up, and as I think will continue to do so. The last year or so, you are hearing a very strong, policy toward the supply side reform. So clearly, the government is trying to, pushing for the consumer economy taking more weight, with the service industry able to respond for more weight in the whole economy. These are all great signs.
Do you worry about debt?
Well, clearly, that's a issue people have been talking about. But in general, with a high growth economy, I think a lot of those issues could be solved. And if you're looking at today's Chinese economy, there's something called a new economy, and there's something called old economy. Old economy refers to traditional manufacturing business, clearly have a lot of challenges. And the new economy actually are doing very well. We're talking about sectors like information technology, healthcare, and consumer sectors which link to the consumption upgrade. Those are all do great.
And you're also seeing American companies like Apple make huge investments.
Exactly. And not just the information technology, in different sectors, from different sectors. There are healthcare companies, there's, consumer company, all really want to penetrate into China or penetrate more into China.
How long will it take them to turn this economy around from being an export economy to a domestic consumer?
I think a lot of things are already in the making, and great progress has been made. I don't know how long it's going to take for the consumer economy to, respond for the type of, percentage like you see in the U.S. But, the trend is good. Look at one data point. Last year, in this called a single day, November the 11th, which is the online shopping day for Chinese consumer. 14 billion transaction was done through one single company, that's Alibaba. Now, in the U.S., we know there's a Cyber Monday.
Right.
We only have $1 billion sales on that day. So the Chinese consumer clearly has a very big appetizer, and I think this is the way to go.
Is Alibaba going to go global?
Very, very much so. In fact, today they have sales into U.S., sales into Europe, and to Middle East, into South Asia. And if you look at all the major e-commerce company in China, not just Alibaba, JD.com, VIP Shop, all of them actually have international expansion ambitions.
And what about financial markets?
Well, it has been a bit of volatile last year.
Yes, it's volatile would be an apt description.
It's getting much better this year. And in fact, I think we are seeing a clear reform measures in place, try to encourage the so-called new economy companies or the innovative companies to able to get listed, more easily in China. And I think this is the, some of those reforms that the Chinese government is putting in place.
You went from, you've had an interesting life. You came, went to school in China, then came to Yale.
That's right.
Went from Yale to Wall Street.
That's correct.
Decided that when things were getting really good in China, you'd leave Wall Street and go back to China.
Yeah, well, I got a call after I had worked for Citibank for 2 years, and someone said, "You're great. You got a Yale background. You came from China. We want you in China to helping the Chinese company to raise money overseas." So I decided that's great, and it's just the starting point of those Chinese company try to raise money either from Hong Kong listing, from U.S. listing, and And I joined Lehman Brothers and worked on a number of Chinese, debt financing and equity financings.
And then you were involved in a company that you helped build, which was in the Expedia business.
That's right. So I'm very proud of that experience because in 1999, after working in the bank industry for more than 6 years, I decided I should try something more entrepreneurial. And so I co-founded C-Trip together with two of my friends.
C-Trip.
C-Trip.
Right.
Meaning Chinese trip.
Right, right.
Obviously, we learn a lot, try to learn from...
but kind of an Expedia China.
Exactly. That's what you can call it. But today, we're almost the same size like Expedia.
Yes.
With 16 years of history. Yeah. It's a $25+ billion market cap company.
Yeah. And then you decided to go into venture capital.
Because I think
with Sequoia, but making it run from China with China decision making.
Yeah, I think it's a very great setup. On one hand, you have the global brand, you have the 40-year experience and views on technology on global basis with Sequoia. At the same time, we have the decision making on the ground by local team. And that's very important because there are very unique dynamics in China. Oftentimes, some of those things worked in U.S. may not work in China, and vice versa.
Does China have the equivalent of a Silicon Valley?
I think you don't look at one single city. I think if you combine the cities of Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Hangzhou, to some extent, they're bigger than Silicon Valley, don't you say?
Well, yeah, but I mean, think of what you just combined.
Exactly, and and to some extent, there are unique edge for certain sectors. Like in Shenzhen, you have some wonderful manufacturing facilities,
right.
Some wonderful supply chain which are already in place. So for a consumer electronics company, you might have a better chance to be successful in China compared with here in the U.S.
So what do you advise American companies who first want to penetrate the Chinese market, whether they sell cars or household appliances or whatever they sell?
There's one important note here. 30 years ago, if you are a leading U.S. company, I think if you penetrate into Chinese market, it's relatively easy exercise. Today, the local companies are very competitive. So you really need to think about whether you have an edge there. And on top of that,
you have to have a local presence too.
Exactly. Not only you have the local presence, but you need to localize your product.